Low cloud from the North Sea encroaching to eastern areas. But across the west, as we look ahead to the weekend, it will turn drier and brighter. I'll see you later.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
With me, Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Wednesday, it is Prime Minister's Questions, live from the House of Commons. So Rishi Sunak facing the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer for the first time, of course, since the government's local election drubbing, losing more than 1,000 councillors. Labour gaining more than 500. Steve Baker on his feet there at the moment. Well, Labour appears confident that it signals a general election victory for them, but analysis of the results showing they could actually fall short of an overall majority. And already talk of a Lib-Lab pact. Could that provide Rishi Sunak with ammunition to fire back across the dispatch box? We'll be finding out shortly at PMQs. Well, we have our trusty panel of MPs shortly, but first, let's bring you some breaking news coming in from the courts, with the publisher of the Mirror newspaper, Mirror Group newspapers, admitting there is, quote, some evidence of unlawful information gathering in relation to the High Court challenge brought by Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, quotes, that warrants compensation. Well, court documents released at the start of the trial in London, MGN said it unreservedly apologised for instances of unlawful information gathering. The publisher saying it would never never be repeated. Let's get the very latest now from the Rolls building with our national reporter Paul Hawkins, who's been following the case. And Paul, this is a full hearing, not a preliminary that we've seen elsewhere, and already a bit of drama.
Yeah, a little bit of drama. Essentially, at the start of the trial, the skeleton arguments were issued by the claimants, David Sherborne, the lawyer representing the claimants, and the skeleton arguments for the defence, Mirror Group newspaper. And Mirror Group newspaper denies phone hacking, which are one of the allegations levelled against them by the claimants. But it has admitted that some third parties were used to unlawfully obtain information. Just to read you the full statement, it says there was some evidence of the instruction of third parties to engage in other types of unlawful information gathering, what's called UIG, in the documents in respect of each of the claimants. And of course we know that one of the claimants is the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry. So they've admitted that some unlawful information gathering took place, and they have said that it does warrant some compensation. Only one of the claimants, it says, I should put it another way, the publisher denies involvement in the case of only one claimant, and that is Michael Turner, also known as Michael Lavelle, who plays Kevin Webster in Coronation Street. Both he and Nicky Sanderson, another Coronation Street actor, are in court today. They're at the back listening and watching proceedings. So they deny any involvement in unlawful information gathering with respect to Michael Turner, but everyone else, they say that third parties were involved in unlawful information gathering. They're saying that does warrant compensation, although they haven't specified what source of compensation that should be. But yeah, some early drama at the start of this case.
And of course that does include Prince Harry. So we'll see what emerges, of course, as that trial gets underway. Paul, thank you very much for updating us there at the Rolls building, and of course all the latest coming from that as the afternoon develops. But also, let's reflect, we've got PMQs joining us in the studio. We have Conservative MP for South Thanet, Craig McKinley, and Labour MP for Brent North, Barry Gardner. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I have to go with you, I guess, first, Barry, without crowing about the election results. However, it does give Keir Starmer a little bit of a fillip, I guess, as he goes into this.
Look, I don't want to crow. I think they were good results. I respect all councillors who work for their communities, and I'm delighted that many of ours obviously have been re-elected and new ones elected. I think the point is this. We now, as a party, need to go forward. We need to build the wider confidence of the country. This was only a small election in local areas.
Yeah, not across all areas, no, indeed.
And so it's a good indication. It does give us confidence that we can form a government.
Right.
But we just need to make sure that the next 18 months there are no slip-ups and we do things right.
And, Craig, the share of the vote, when analysed, doesn't indicate there's an overall majority for Labour to get over the line for a general election. Already the rumours of Lib-Lab PAC talks, which I guess would give Rishi Sunak a bit of ammunition to fire back.
No, absolutely. I mean, local elections are what they are. The local elections, poor turnouts. I know one of the wards that we narrowly held last time round, we lost quite badly this time. Turnout 25%, turnouts in national elections, general elections, closer to 70%. Of course, they are an indicator of temperature raising and all of that. But let's not get too excited. History is littered with election losses and wins and a very different result.
But is it also a mandate, a vote on government performance? Because we've just had Steve Barclay now acknowledging that you've missed your targets in terms of NHS waiting lists, yet more ammunition for Keir Starmer to fire at the Prime Minister.
No, absolutely. And one wonders the true nature behind many of the strikes that we've seen across the country. Seem to be rather well placed for a winter and spring of some discontent. But just putting that aside, of course, if you're in the saddle, as government is, in terms of cost of living and all of the other issues, the electorate tends to blame you for it, even though the headwinds are not really of our making. And I think everybody does appreciate that. And those indicators can only get better over the months ahead.
One of those Sunak pledges, stop the boats. We've got the migration bill going through the House of Lords this afternoon, with a certain Archbishop of Canterbury likely to comment on that. And one wonders where this is going to leave the moral political debate, if I can put it that way, between all sides, bearing in mind the government's having trouble getting this accepted across the board.
Mark, let me think. This is a tough one. from whom do I take my moral advice? Should I pay any attention to the Archbishop of Canterbury and a bevy of bishops, or should it be from Suella Braverman? It's a tough one, but I think I know where I'll come down in the end.
Right. OK. However, we are being told that Lord Paddock, who is a former senior police officer, now Lib Dem peer, is going to attempt what they call the fatal motion, Britain failing to meet its international law commitments. Labour, we understand, is not backing that. It's not going to go, basically saying because it's come through the Commons, do democratic processes already taken place?
Well, we have two parts to our democratic process. One is in the Commons, the other is the revising chamber of the Lords. And it's appropriate that the Lords should revise this legislation because many people on all sides of the House have really strong objections to what is being done. This is a policy. Remember, the government has already changed our international obligations insofar as it said that it is now the mode of transport by which you come here to this country that is relevant in deciding whether you are...
safe passage, in other words, I guess.
Well, no, they're saying if you've come on a small boat, you're automatically illegal and you automatically go.
Right.
Now, our international obligations say that it depends on whether that person has a well-founded fear of persecution in their country of origin. Nothing to do with their mode of transport.
No. And Suella Braverman, of course, and Justice Secretary Alex Chalk as well, saying, urging peers, don't stand in the way of the will of the British people. However, if the will of the British people goes against international law, you've got a bit of a problem.
Well, there's always this sort of vague interpretation of international law. It seems to be interpreted in different ways in different countries. I've always found it rather bizarre that if you go through the asylum process in the UK, you've got a 76% chance of getting through the other end with a yes.
Eventually.
But the EU average is 16%. Same 1951 Refugee Convention, the same ECHR conventions. But it's quite strange that Barry is now praying in aid to the unelected House of Lords to actually stop a bill that has gone through the House of Commons.
That is the long-standing democratic process. And, of course, what they will be looking at is maybe some provisions in particular for unaccompanied minors, for instance, on these boats.
No, I think there are some. I mean, I respect the House of Lords. I really do, in terms of its revising ability. But this is a very key issue. It was part of our manifesto, and at times I think the Lords should do their bit to revise and improve, but not to be laying down fatal motions to actually destroy something that's gone through the House of Commons.
And what about then the involvement of the Archbishop of Canterbury, such a public figure, of course, after the coronation, appearing again to be involved directly in the political sphere?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that is the settlement of our constitution, that bishops have a role in the House of Lords. I'm just concerned that the House of Lords are showing its muscularity rather too regularly of late, particularly on issues that have gone through the House of Commons unamended. Right. And I think we might be seeing more of it with the Retained EU Law Bill, which again passed through the Commons unamended.
Lords flexing their muscles under the ermine, there's a thought.
What is absolutely clear is that the days when the Church of England could be called the Tory party at prayer are long gone, and thank goodness. But it's the first time I've heard Craig criticising our British judiciary and counterposing it to European judges. If they are not finding that, I mean, Craig gave those figures.
Well, the International Court of Human Justice?
No, he gave the figures about how many people who claim asylum in the UK go through our courts and then are found to be genuine refugees. 73%, I think you said, Craig. 73% go through the system and are found to have been genuine by British judges in British courts. And yet Craig is trying to say that the EU has got this right because they are actually saying that less of the people who want to settle in France or Germany or Spain or Portugal are actually genuine.
No, the point I'm making is international law is the same, and yet there's a different outcome, which is perverse and bizarre.
I think our judges get it right.
Your argument. Yeah, OK. Just to actually look ahead to what we may see now at... I think we're starting. Let's head to the chamber. PMQs now underway.
And others, in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Clive Lewis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, I raised the case of a Norwich Army veteran. In such agony, he was forced to pull out 18 of his own teeth because he couldn't get access to a dentist. The grim fact is, despite repeated promises from the Prime Minister, Norwich and Norfolk remain dental deserts. So, Mr. Speaker, dentists excel at extracting rotten teeth. So will the Prime Minister agree with me? The only way my constituents will see results is when this rotten government is extracted from office and replaced with a Labour one.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear about the honourable gentleman's constituent. With regard to dentistry, he'll know there are record sums going into dentistry and indeed 500 more NHS dentists working today. Because of the contract reforms that we've put in place, 10% more activity can happen, and DHSE are currently talking about reforming the dentistry contract with the persons in practice to increase activity further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Gordon, unfortunately, has been receiving cancer treatment at the Mount Vernon Hospital, which will soon fall within Sadiq Khan's new ULEZ boundaries. As Gordon continues his daily treatment, he will now be expected to pay £12.50 a charge or buy a new compliant vehicle. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the British people already have enough on without Labour's London Mayor stretching household budgets further? Just so he can cover his mismanagement of TfL finances. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry to hear of my honourable friend's constituent Gordon, and I send him my best wishes. He will know that transport in London is devolved to the Labour Mayor, who is expanding the zone against the overwhelming views of residents and businesses. And what's more, his plan to raise costs for hard-working families is totally backed by the Leader of the Opposition. Perhaps he can now tell us why.
I don't think he's responsible for the questions. We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank all those who took part in the coronation celebrations over the weekend? And can I also take this chance to wish all the very best to my brilliant and talented constituent, May Muller, who is representing the UK at Eurovision in Liverpool this weekend. The whole country is behind you, May. Now, Mr. Speaker, this time last week, the Prime Minister had to correct the record on misleading claims he made about employment numbers. Can he provide a further update? Now he's cost 1,000 Tory councillors their jobs.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me pass on my best wishes to May as well for this weekend Eurovision. With regard to the local elections, Mr. Speaker, maybe I can just offer the honourable gentleman a tiny bit of advice from one of his predecessors. One of his predecessors, Tony Blair, who I was reading the other day. What did Tony Blair? He said the right honourable gentleman can be as cocky as he likes about the local elections. Come a general election, policy counts. And we know, Mr. Speaker, the problem for him is he doesn't have any.
The Prime Minister said he was going to lose 1,000 seats, and then he managed it. After 13 years, a Tory promise they actually haven't broken. And this is the Prime Minister who's only had to fight for two things in his life. Last year, he lost a Tory beauty contest to the member for South West Norfolk, who then lost to a lettuce. Last week, when he finally came into contact with voters, he lost everywhere. No matter who the electorate is, the Prime Minister keeps entering a two-horse race and somehow finishing third. Given his track record, who does he think he's actually got a mandate from?
Mr. Speaker, it's a bit rich to hear about mandates from the person who's broken every single promise he was elected on. I mean, go through the list, Mr. Speaker. Nationalisations, NHS outsourcing, universal credit, and now tuition fees. Mr. Speaker, he was for them all before he was against them. He's not just the softie, he's the flaky too.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can understand why the Prime Minister's trying to wish away his terrible results, but peddling nonsense just doesn't work. Up and down the country, people want the government to focus on the cost of living, but he's got no answers. None. Is he planning to carry on as if nothing happened and ignore the message he was sent last week? Or is he going to do what a Labour government would do and announce an immediate freeze in council tax bills.
Mr. Speaker, I know he's asked his Labour councillors rightly to focus on the cost of living. Perhaps they could start with reducing council tax to the level in Conservative-run areas. But, Mr. Speaker, we're getting on with halving people's energy bills, freezing fuel duty to help them with the cost of living. What is stopping him having a plan is that, unfortunately, his Shadow Chancellor recently said she's discovered she's got a problem, Mr. Speaker. She realised that she actually, this is what she said, she actually has to, shock horror, say where the money's going to come from. With a £90 billion black hole in her plans, she's got a lot of work to do.
Mr. Speaker, there's only one party that broke the economy, and they're sitting right there. And it seems to me, to quote one of his more electorally successful predecessors, nothing has changed. Still blaming other people, still refusing to take the necessary action, still not listening to the country. And on council tax, it's quite simple. A Labour government would give every council the grant they need to freeze those bills, fully paid for by ending the handouts he's giving to oil and gas giants. So I ask him again, now his plan has been utterly rejected, why won't he do the same?
Mr. Speaker, just a quick history lesson. While he was busy softening sentences 13 years ago, let me just remind him what we inherited. It was the largest deficit in the G7 from Labour. Higher unemployment. The coffers were totally empty. And it didn't stop there, Mr. Speaker. After that, they wanted a longer lockdown. And now, they won't even oppose the picketers and the protesters, Mr. Speaker. Even in opposition, they're damaging the economy.
He's just not listening, is he? Even after the entire country, Mr. Speaker, from the Peak District to the Garden of England, rejected his government last week, he still thinks that protecting oil and gas profits is more important than freezing bills. Now, I'm sure the Prime Minister must finally have met some working people in recent weeks. Did any of them understand why he insists on protecting his precious non-dom tax status rather than scrapping it and using the money to train thousands of doctors and nurses?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he said that this money would fund the NHS workforce, but that plan was actually looked at by one of his own colleagues recently. Now that person said that it would discourage doctors and nurses from coming here. And that there was a £2 billion shortfall in his sums. Who said that? It was Alistair Darling. He might remember those days. It's when Labour bankrupted the economy.
I think that is the definition of nonsense. And this is the price of having a tired, worn-out government fronted by a Prime Minister who boasts he's never had a working-class friend. He's smiling his way through the cost of living crisis, gloating about success while waiting lists grow. He's pretending that crime, house building, schools are all just doing fine, while handing the country 24 tax rises, all with his name on them. How does he think the Tories can possibly provide the answers Britain needs when the whole country has already told him they're the problem, not the solution?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is right. We all do say some silly things when we're younger. I was a teenager, and he'll know what I'm talking about, because I think in his 40s he was still talking about abolishing the monarchy, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
But it's the same old guff from him every week, Mr. Speaker. All politics and no action. We're getting on with halving people's energy bills, freezing fuel duty, cutting the costs of childcare, and boosting pay. While he's busy plotting coalitions, we're getting on and delivering for the British people.
Mr. Speaker, this Saturday is Surrey Day, a chance for locals and visitors to celebrate everything wonderful about our county including our beautiful historic High Street in Guildford with its independent shops. But frequently raised with me is empty shops. High rents with high business rates makes it difficult for independent retailers to compete with national chains. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this government must do everything it can to support our high streets as part of our plan to boost economic growth?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right about the importance of high streets for local communities, not just in Surrey but around the country. That's why we are abolishing business rates for hundreds of thousands of eligible businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector, and investing billions of pounds through the High Streets Fund and our Towns Fund to support local communities up and down the country.
SNP spokesperson Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister was to go to the boot of his Land Rover and pull out some placards which said "Save our nom-doms," would he expect to be arrested by the police?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, can I first put on record my thanks to the police for all their hard work over the weekend, ensuring that the coronation was a success. Now, look, on this issue, Mr. Speaker, we believe the police should have powers to make sure that they can protect the public from unnecessary and serious disruption. I respectfully recognise that the honourable gentleman disagrees with our position. I guess the question for both of us is, what does the honourable leader of the opposition think about this? Because it's quite hard to keep up.
Can I just remind the Prime Minister, it's Prime Minister's questions for him to answer, not asking, not for what the opposition's doing. Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about here is that nurses strike, doctors strike, firefighters strike, protest, firefighters protest, and of course Republicans protest as well. And they do so because it's a fundamental right within our democracy to be able to protest. So is the Prime Minister seriously saying that moving forward you can have your rights, but only on his terms?
Mr. Speaker, it is also the right of the British public to be able to go about their ordinary day-to-day lives without undue serious disruption. That's why it's right that the police have extra powers. I respect that the honourable gentleman disagrees with that, but we think it is right, and people will see every day on TV, their lives being disrupted. They're not able to get to school, to get to hospital appointments, and indeed to get to work. They should be able to do that, and the police should have powers to stop those who are preventing that from happening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was an honour to welcome the Australian Prime Minister to Barrow last week so he could meet some of our fantastic apprentices, see the submarine programme and reaffirm his commitment to the AUKUS programme that will deliver thousands of jobs in my constituency and keep our nation safe. But what was a national endeavour is now an international one, and it's going to require a whole-of-government approach to get it over the line and deliver it well. So with that in mind, could I invite my right honourable friend to Barrow to see the programme for himself, and also to meet with me to see how we can best leverage the opportunities from this for the people of Barrow for generations to come?
Well, my honourable friend is a fantastic advocate for his local industry and community, and he's right, the SSN AUKUS submarines will be built in Barrow, the home of the British submarine industry. It will create thousands of new jobs, not just in Barrow, but across the UK. That's why the government is investing billions to modernise the enterprise, and I look forward to taking him up on his invitation.
And David.
Mr. Speaker, last week many lifelong Conservative voters turned to the Liberal Democrats to be their strong local champions. They delivered their verdict on the government's failure to hold water companies to account for dumping raw sewage into our rivers and onto our beaches. Last year, water bosses were paid £15 million in bonuses, rewarded for destroying our precious natural environment. 3 of those executives have now turned down their bonuses, but they should never have been entitled to them in the first place. So will the Prime Minister ban these sewage bonuses so that the dumping actually stops?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I struggle to hear the full question, but I think in one sense it doesn't really matter, because we all know the Liberal Democrats say one thing here and another thing locally anyway. And it is remarkable. No wonder he's attracted to the Labour leader these days, Mr. Speaker. Political opportunism and a broken promise on tuition fees. It must be like looking in the mirror.
Ben Bradley.
To highlight some success with Mansfield District Council now having more Conservative councillors than at any point in my lifetime after last week's local elections. I'm very proud of our local team. But one thing we heard on the doorstep was frustration, a frustrating expectation that government needs to deliver on key pledges. There has been a commitment to our part of the world that we'll be given the clout, the investment to catch up with other regions that historically have had more than we've had. So will the Prime Minister take the opportunity to reiterate his commitment and to my constituents reassure them that he will support growth and investment in the East Midlands?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a tireless advocate for the East Midlands, and in particular, I welcome the devolution deal that has been agreed among the 4 local authorities in the region, something I know my honourable friend has campaigned for. And like him, I look forward to those new devolved institutions being established as soon as possible to drive economic growth in his community.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has previously declared, and I quote, "My daughter is the climate change champion in our house." I wonder if he's asked her what she thinks about Rosebank, the biggest undeveloped oil field in the North Sea, which would blow climate targets, create more emissions than 28 of the world's poorest countries combined, involve the obscene transfer of £4 billion of taxpayers' money to a Norwegian energy firm, Equinor, and do nothing for energy security since the vast majority of the oil will be exported. If he gives it the green light, will he be able to look his daughter in the eye and honestly say that he has done everything in his power to give her and all other young people a livable future?
Mr. Speaker, as the Independent Committee for Climate Change has acknowledged, we will need fossil fuels for the next few decades as we transition to a greener future. And during that period, it makes absolutely no sense to not invest in the resources we have here at home, to import foreign fossil fuels, not create jobs here, and import them at twice the carbon emissions as our local resources. It is an economically illiterate policy, Mr. Speaker, but that's what you'd expect from the Green Party.
George Eustace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last June, the government committed to bring forward a horticulture strategy to identify ways to expand British production of horticulture. And the importance of this was underlined by some of the supply chain challenges we saw earlier this spring. But in the last week, there's been speculation that the government might be abandoning that strategy. Can the Prime Minister give us any reassurance that the government remains committed to expanding this important British industry?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for all of his work championing this area. We are delivering for the horticulture sector, and it will benefit from the £168 million investment to drive innovation and support fruit production. And that's why we also passed the new Genetic Technology Act, Mr. Speaker, taking advantage of our Brexit opportunities to unlock the potential of new technologies. But I look forward to discussing this and other ideas at our new upcoming food summit.
Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has the Prime Minister or any of his ministers given commitments to BP, Equinor or any other company about contracts at the Teesworks site?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, contracts at the site would be a commercial matter for the companies involved.
Mr. Speaker, our farmers provide our food and our countryside's future. But there's concern among some Oxfordshire farmers that the new schemes under DEFRA's Agricultural Transition Plan aren't ready for farmers to access them to make up the shortfall from the basic payment scheme. Will my right honourable friend push his colleagues in DEFRA to roll out the rest of the SFI standards as soon as possible and to consider double stacking SFI and countryside stewardship payments to ensure that Oxfordshire's farmers get the support they need?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and of course we want to make sure that we continue to support farmers to produce healthy, nutritious food. We are pressing ahead with the ELM scheme, fine-tuning them though to make sure that they work even better for farmers. We want to make sure there's enough flexibility in the sustainable farming initiatives, and that's why DEFRA have designed the schemes with farmers in mind, enabling them to do more and to make sure that they can use countryside stewardship schemes on the same plots of land. But I look forward to discussing this with him and other colleagues as well.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Stirling, we've got a really potentially very exciting development at Forthside on former Ministry of Defence land, and sadly the development's got a bit stuck over a dispute about the costs of the decontamination of that land. Now, I'll work with anybody to get a result for Stirling. Will the Prime Minister meet with me and representatives of Stirling Council to get this development unblocked and make the progress we all want to see?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have invested in Stirling previously to unlock investment and drive growth, and I'll ensure that the honourable gentleman gets the meeting he needs with the relevant minister to make progress.
Mark Warburton.
The Prime Minister and I share a profound optimism about the power of technology, and AI in particular has the power to revolutionise public services and our private sector as well. But does he agree with me that it comes with risks? And while there are unrealistic calls to pause research into it altogether, it is crucial for us to work with our allies around the world so that the global norms that emerge in this important area reflect our values.
Well, my honourable friend speaks with experience and knowledge on this issue, and I absolutely agree with the thrust of his question. Whilst it would be implausible and wrong to halt the development of this technology, it is right that we ensure that there are appropriate guardrails in place as we look to exploit its opportunities. Those are the conversations we are having, not just with the companies involved, but also with our allies around the world, and he can expect further progress in the coming weeks and months.
Mike Nolly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following on from his earlier answer, as the Prime Minister knows, an Eat Out to Help Out scheme was introduced in August 2020, which increased demand for eating in restaurants by some 216% compared to 2019, with figures now showing that over 17,500 retail chain stores closed in 2020 alone, affecting nearly 35,000 employees. Would or has the Prime Minister considered a similar scheme for bricks and mortar retail, bricks versus clicks if you like, as part of the wider plan for regenerating local high streets and town centres?
Well,
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the way that we are supporting high streets and town centres is through making sure that we cut business rates in England. Obviously, the Scottish Government will receive Barnett consequentials from those actions, but now hundreds of thousands of local businesses on our high streets don't pay any business rates at all. And on top of that, through the Levelling Up Fund, Towns Fund and others, we're investing directly in local communities. Indeed, in his own, where I know council leaders described our investment of £19 million as very welcome and a real boost for the economic recovery.
Maggie Through.
Mr. Speaker, my original friend recently scored a very rare own goal by backing Stockton Football Club in the Northern Premier League East Playoff Final, which eventually saw Long Eaton United win on penalties. In the interest of good sportsmanship, will he now congratulate Ian Deakin and his team on their resounding victory, wish Long Eaton United every success in the league for next season, and join me at Grange Park to cheer on Long Eaton United for the next season and wish them luck every season in the future.
Yeah, well, Mr. Speaker, can I join my honourable friend in congratulating her local football team and all involved in their stunning success. I'm not sure if I'll be able to join her in the immediate future, but I do look forward to seeing them go from strength to strength, much as the fortunes of my own team, sadly, are not in the place I would like them to be.
Jamie Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister may well have seen the astonishing sight of a former Scottish Government minister standing up in the Chamber of Scottish Parliament and tearing up, literally ripping into pieces, the Scottish Government's highly protected marine area proposal. This proposal is deeply controversial all over Scotland and has even led to it being compared with his second Highland clearances. Is this not now the time? Is this not now the time for the UK Government to step in and work with the devolved... There you have it. Mr. Speaker, I will not be silenced because it matters... This matters deeply to my constituents. Deeply. Is it not time for the UK government to step in, work with the devolved administrations to come up with a scheme that works and is acceptable, a conservation scheme that is acceptable in our fishing communities all around the UK?
Well, The honourable gentleman makes an excellent point, and he is a passionate champion, as he should be, for his local fishing communities. And he's right to highlight the concerns that have been raised, not just by them, but by members of the SNP's own party, about the potentially damaging impact of their plans to introduce the highly protected marine areas in the way that they are. I would encourage the SNP government to continue working with the Scottish fishing industry and coastal communities to understand their concerns, and as we've seen them recently U-turn on other poor thought-out decisions, hopefully they can relook at this one too.
Manchester.
The United Kingdom has a strong, deep, multi-dimensional relationship with Pakistan. And there are over 1.5 million British Pakistanis here, and many of them are dual nationals, as am I. The Prime Minister will have seen the scenes coming out from Pakistan, the civil unrest where people have lost their lives due to the detention of the Prime Minister Imran Khan. There are real concerns about the circumstances of his detention and the right to have a fair trial. The United Kingdom has in the past sent observers to hearings around the world to ensure natural justice is done. Has the Prime Minister considered that? If not, will he consider it?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his question. The UK, of course, has a long-standing and close relationship with Pakistan, and this weekend, especially as Commonwealth partners. The arrest of the former Prime Minister is an internal matter for Pakistan. We support peaceful, democratic processes and adherence to the rule of law, and we are monitoring the situation carefully.
Carolyn Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A little boy has gone to school today in shoes that don't fit him because his parents can't afford new ones. A little girl had water on her cornflakes because her mum had no money for milk. These are real stories from Faith and Families, a charity in my constituency that deal with poverty every day. Poverty that is causing prolonged shame and leading to a mental health crisis. Faith and Families are worried about these kids. I'm worried about these kids. If the Prime Minister is worried about these kids, what's he going to do about it?
Mr. Speaker, we don't want any child to grow up in poverty, and that's why I'm proud that there are 1.7 million fewer people living in poverty today than in 2010 because of the actions of this and previous Conservative governments. That includes hundreds of thousands of children, and we are providing incredible support to the most vulnerable in our society as we speak. Just last week, the first of our cost of living payments went out, £900 to help the most vulnerable families in our society. Those are our values, and we will keep supporting them as the inflation remains high.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier in questions, the Leader of the Opposition sought to draw attention to council tax rates and council tax increases and offering some crocodile tears in the process. Can I draw attention to the Prime Minister's attention that whereas we have seen 43% increase in council tax rates since 2010 in England, the increase in Wales has been a staggering 67%. So therefore, is it not the case we should be looking at what Labour do rather than what Labour say?
My right honourable friend makes an excellent point. The Leader of the Opposition is very fond in telling us that Labour in Wales is his blueprint for how he would like to run the country, and as we've seen, all it means is higher bills for hard-working British families.
Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last 2 years, the Drax Power Station in Yorkshire has, on average, burned almost 20,000 tonnes of trees every single day, releasing an equivalent amount of carbon into the atmosphere. During that time, whilst our constituents have struggled with their heating bills, the private company running Drax has received £1.5 million of subsidy through the government's energy policy every single day. This is set to continue until 2027. Can I ask the Prime Minister, will he step in and review this grotesque distortion of energy policy, which incentivises deforestation whilst making no contribution to tackling the climate emergency?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, while not being able to comment on the contract details of one particular company, what I can say is that our record on this issue is that since the benchmark was established, emissions in this country have fallen by almost 50%, whilst at the same time we've grown the economy by 2/3, not something I know the SNP government is as focused on as we are, but at the same time, because of the way that we regulate new and renewable energies, we've seen the price of renewables like offshore wind decline from £140 an hour to around 40. That shows a regulatory system that is working in delivering lower cost renewable energy for British families.
Mr. Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Plastic pollution is a scourge of modern day society. My 10-minute rule bill seeks to have microfibre, microplastic filters fitted in all commercial and domestic washing machines, legislation which France and other countries have already moved forward with. Will the Prime Minister, who has already done an enormous amount in tackling plastic pollution, will he organise a meeting between me and the stakeholders, particularly washing machine manufacturers, with the Secretary of State to discuss this very important issue?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we want to tackle microplastic pollution wherever possible, which is why we introduced a microbead ban and a tax on plastic bags. I know my honourable friend has campaigned for filters on washing machines, but he will also know they can be costly to install. DEFRA have outlined plans to make sure that we can use more filters, but I will ensure that he gets the meeting that he needs with the relevant minister to discuss this important matter further.
Stephen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government ditching its pledge to recruit 6,000 more GPs is yet another example of the Tories over-promising and under-delivering, with teacher recruitment targets missed and housing pledges shelved. Why does the Prime Minister think that the only target he's actually met was the loss of 1,000 Tory councillors last week?
Maybe the honourable gentleman can tell us which of the many promises that the Leader of the Opposition made to him when he was campaigning he's most happy that he's U-turned on.
John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Lincolnshire's roads, foodstuffs grown in our fine county are transported across the nation, but the Highways Authority struggles to fund roads because of the skewed funding formula devised by a previous Labour government. So many of our public services suffer, policing included. So will the Prime Minister agree to urgently review the local government funding formula, the police funding formula, so that Lincolnshire can have a fair deal?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to stand up for the particular needs of his rural community, and like him I recognise that rural areas do often have higher costs of providing services. It's right that those are reflected where we can in funding formulas, but I'll make sure that he gets a meeting with a relevant minister to discuss this important matter further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 13,450 prepayment meter vouchers have gone unclaimed in my Glasgow Central constituency at a value of over £887,000. Across Scotland, £16.5 million is unclaimed. The Prime Minister's Energy Bill Support Scheme is failing if money which could be helping our vulnerable constituents is resting in his government's account. I recall he's not very familiar with how prepayment meters work, but what will he do to ensure that every single penny gets out of government coffers and into the meters of those who really need it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful that the Honourable Lady for a Change acknowledged the support that the government is providing to families up and down the country. Particular attention was given in designing those schemes to how to get the support to prepayment meters. The ministers are always engaged with stakeholders to make sure that there is awareness of those schemes, and I'll make sure that we keep up those efforts so that people do get the help that they need and deserve.
David Morris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's very interesting that the Leader of the Opposition says about keeping council tax low when the Labour Party voted to increase Morecambe Town Council from historically £400,000, £200,000 to £2 million. So on that basis, I'd like to meet with the Prime Minister to see where we can find government time to cap parish councils from doing this sort of abhorrent behaviour.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to highlight that council tax in Labour areas is higher than that in Conservative areas, which is not right at a time when there are pressures on the cost of living. I look forward to meeting him to discuss his plans to keep British families' household bills as low as they can be.
John Speller.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. Dozens of Sudanese doctors who'd been working in the NHS were stranded and not allowed to return here. Last week, the Minister told us here that the Prime Minister took the decision to get them back. So why hadn't such a straightforward decision been made much earlier by the Home Secretary or the Foreign Secretary? Is it because he's an obsessive micromanager, or is it that his ministers are just not up to the job? Which one is it, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is completely wrong to describe as straightforward a complex and dangerous evacuation in a war zone. And actually, it is actually the case that everyone involved deserves enormous credit for conducting what was the longest and largest evacuation of any Western country from Sudan. During that process, it was right that we moved deliberately and carefully to ensure the security of everyone involved and to prioritise British nationals and their dependents. Now that the operation is complete, we can look back and thank everyone for what was an incredibly successful operation.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since 2010, violent crime has dropped by 38% and neighbourhood crime has dropped by over 50%. But one crime that has gone up is fraud. Now, many of us have dealt with constituents who've struggled with fraud. What is the Prime Minister going to do about it?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. 40% of all crime now is fraud. It's damaging for people's well-being as well as harming their finances, which is why the Home Secretary and I just recently launched a new plan to combat fraud with significant new investment, hundreds of new officers to tackle it, and action on social media companies to empower people to take action and to stop fraud happening in the first place. It represents the most comprehensive plan to tackle this issue, and it will make a big difference to families everywhere.
Final question, Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, a young man with brilliant potential who was 16, Renell Charles, was brutally murdered on his way out from school in my constituency in Walthamstow. Yesterday, a 16-year-old boy was charged with his murder. Renell's family are heartbroken. Children in my community...
This is sub judice, so rather than go into detail, Stella Creasy.
What I'm saying is those children are terrified to go to school. Their parents are frightened to let them, and the teachers are at their wits' end. They've asked me to come here today, Prime Minister, to beg you to make the epidemic of youth crime in our country a national priority. So will the Prime Minister meet with myself and representatives from my local community to talk about how we can get the mental health and mentoring support these young people need so that every young person in our country has that future they deserve?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope my honourable friend, I know the whole House will join me in expressing our sympathies and condolences to Renell's family for what's happened. She's absolutely right. We should do everything we can to tackle violence and murders against young people in particular. I'm pleased that knife crime has fallen by almost 10% and serious violence has fallen by 24% in the last few years. That's because we are giving the police the powers they need, whether that's stop or search, increasing jail terms and confiscating around 90,000 weapons. Of course, we will always look to do more to make sure that our streets are safe for our young people.
All for now.
A pretty feisty PMQs once more, plenty of personal attacks and knockabout, and certainly it launched with Sir Keir Starmer asking the Prime Minister about this issue of employment numbers, in particular the number of Conservative councillors. 1,000 Tory councillors losing their jobs. Rishi Sunak countering maybe he could offer the honourable gentleman, he said, a tiny bit of advice from one of his predecessors. Tony Blair saying that the right honourable gentleman can be as cocky as he likes about the local elections, come a general election, policy counts. And that certainly seemed to then establish the way forward for plenty of accusation and counter-accusation over who crashed the economy and when. Joining us in the studio once more, our panel of MPs, Craig McKinley for the Tories and Barry Gardiner for Labour. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. And certainly there were lots of personal blows. Sunak accusing Keir Starmer not just a softie, but a flaky too.
Yes. Look, this is what I think puts people off politics, when it gets just personal abuse. I thought, actually, apart from Stella's question at the end, which I thought was excellent, there were a number of there were a number of really good questions in this PMQs. Most of them actually asked by backbenchers. You had Clive Lewis at the beginning talking about dentistry and the importance of dentistry, and he made it funny. He talked about a dental desert. He talked about extracting rotten teeth and extracting the rotten government. I thought very cleverly done, but a real point to it, a policy point to it, that people need access to a dentist, and they're not getting it. So these were the things that I think really did come through, and a very, very good point from. Was it the SNP guy, Craig?
On Drax Power Station.
On the Drax Power
Station.
Thank goodness somebody is saying that at PMQs. It's something that a number of us have been saying in articles and with ministers for years, and the government needs to act on it. So I think it's really good to see some very sensible policy-based questions.
So the backbenchers are stepping up to the plate.
Absolutely.
Given that, I mean, talking of the SNP, it was Stephen Flynn again in the SNP that brought in this question about the police powers and what happened with those protests of the coronation. So did both leaders fail the country in not addressing these real matters of import, but having, the knockabout about who crashed the economy, lessons of history and so on, and all the name-calling?
Well, I think we had a bit more of a feisty exchange this week than I've seen for the last few weeks. It's been a bit dull, if I'm honest. Maybe it's watching it from here than rather being in it. But Sir Keir, I mean, he had open goals for himself.
The 1,000 seats.
I mean, he's got a lot of good news for himself. But I think that the PM, on the rails a little bit this week, as he's bound to be after those election results last week. I think he was particularly feisty and gave as good as he got. And I think we're going to see more of this. What are the true policies of Keir Starmer? The flip-flops that we've seen so many of.
Not just a softie, but a flaky too. You've made an interesting point about, the aspect of being away from the chamber and seeing it from afar, and therefore, I guess, can you actually gauge the amount of support on the backbenchers for Rishi Sunak from watching it here on the television screens?
No, that didn't really come across here. But I mean, I was impressed with the backbench questions, and I don't agree with Barry on very much, and particularly on energy policy. I think probably wholly disagree with him. I'm chairman of the Net Zero Scrutiny Group, but on the Drax issue, this is a national scandal. This is a national scandal. The Drax operation imports virgin wood and it's zero carbon. Well, I mean, come on.
Did they actually have an answer? That, as you say, was a very interesting question, but I'm not so sure that they got an answer.
What the Prime Minister did was he tried to turn it into a question that he could dismiss because of commercial confidentiality. The contract terms. Nothing to do with that. And Craig's right, it actually is damaging to the environment, not only from the emissions that it produces, which are not accounted for by the UK, but also by the biodiversity loss in the country of origin, which is at the moment predominantly from Canada and from the US, and now increasingly from the Baltic states as well. So we are denuding
and not
forests.
least the diesel ship that delivers the stuff.
Indeed. It is an absolute scandal, and we need to, my view is very clear, we need to be going increasingly towards renewables. Biomass is not one of them.
Right, OK. And obviously the Prime Minister still thinks protecting oil and gas profits more important than freezing bills, Sir Keir saying. But, I mean, that was the other issue about council tax. And rather unfortunate, perhaps, for Labour in terms of raising this issue. Quite a few backbenchers saying, well, hold on a minute, council tax bills in Labour authorities or in Wales a lot higher.
Well, you see, that argument would work if we hadn't just had the council elections and people had voted en masse to get rid of the Conservative councillors and put in the Labour ones.
Right.
But the other point there is this, and that is councils have lost huge amounts in their revenue support grant from central government. And I think if you look at the councils that have lost most, you'll find that those are Labour councils, which is why and of course 80% of what councils spend comes not from council tax, but from that revenue support grant. So the only way they have, indeed. So what they have to do is they have to raise the council tax, which local residents pay, to compensate for what central government is not doing.
Yeah, and certainly finally, Starmer saying Labour would have this immediate freeze on council tax bills, which clearly has been a bit of a vote winner on the doorstep.
I don't think anybody believes that Labour are the party to actually keep taxes low. I mean, we heard today they want more taxes on energy companies. My personal view is 75% is more than enough already. If we're trying to go towards energy security, taxing the companies that are actually going to provide a degree of energy security is the wrong way to do it.
We do have the highest tax take from the British public ever by this Conservative government.
And you want more. Starmer did indicate 24 tax rises under Rishi Sunak, which can't be denied. That is a fact.
No, absolutely, it is a fact. And
many Tory backbenchers are
I was one of them, very regularly. I mean, how much can a country take out of its economy into more spending on various public services that we want without tipping the balance that puts entrepreneurs off, stops international investment? And I was very critical. Of the rise in corporation tax, because I just don't think that gives the right message when Ireland has 12.5% just over the border from Northern Ireland.
While we were witnessing these scenes in the Commons, in another place or the other place, an important story coming in from the House of Lords as PMQs is underway, because the Archbishop of Canterbury has now delivered an attack on the government's migration bill. This is what the Archbishop said in the Lords a little earlier.
This bill fails utterly to take a long-term and strategic view of the challenges of migration and undermines international cooperation, rather than taking an opportunity for the UK to show leadership, as we did in 1951. Even if this bill succeeded in temporarily stopping the boats, and I don't think it will, it won't stop conflict or climate migration. The IPCC forecasts that climate change by itself, let alone the conflicts it's already causing, will lead to at least 800 million more refugees a year in total by 2050. I urge the government to reconsider much of the bill, which fails to live up to our history, our moral responsibility, and our political and international interests.
That is the Archbishop of Canterbury with that intervention in terms of the Lord's reading of that migration bill. Interesting that he was obviously talking about moral responsibility, but also the realities, if you like, about climate change and how it would be creating yet more refugees coming across.
Well, and we use climate change as the excuse for everything. You know, hailstones in Harpenden yesterday must be climate change. The odd warm day must be climate change. Anything can be laid at the door of climate change. Now, I have every respect for the position of Archbishop of Canterbury. I really have. But I think he's wrong on this one. He's referring back to the 1951 convention, which I mentioned earlier on. It was a very different world. It wasn't such a mobile world. It wasn't such a world where it is comparatively easy to cross continents. Where he's arguing against what this bill is trying to achieve. I mean, my key is it's trying to stop that very perilous channel crossing, which is taking people's lives. And they're leaving from a safe country, it's called France, and they've crossed over much of Europe, all safe countries on the way. So there's criticism again, without solutions. Now, I don't know what the solution is that the Archbishop proposes. I didn't hear any in that clip. But realistically, my email inbox is full of housing issues. My email inbox is full of problems for my constituents. To further add to the burdens of every high street by taking hotels and all of the rest of it, I do not think is a recipe for success. We do need to solve this head on, and this is a bill that is more robust than some we've seen out of governments in the past, but it's got one thing, and that is to try and stop that pull factor to the UK and to actually stop this traffic.
But that is the point that the Archbishop seems to be making, that try and look at the cause of the migration first before addressing the boats coming across. But just to pick up on this point, that the Archbishop saying obviously morally unacceptable to leave the poorest countries to deal with the migration crisis, not particularly criticising this migration bill itself, but the whole process of how the problem is dealt with elsewhere.
No, the Archbishop has actually criticised this bill in particular and the whole Rwandan settlement already. So that's not the case. But I think the key thing here is what he's pointing to, and I think it is important that he talks about the 1951 Convention, because Britain did take a lead there in corralling the international community to come to an agreement about how we would handle refugees who had a well-founded fear of persecution in their country of origin. Now, we should be doing that again, because Craig's right, the circumstances have changed, but that means we now need to develop a proper international consensus that is going to deal with this in those countries of origin and close by. And what the Archbishop is pointing to is that you don't deal with the problem by simply putting a block at the end of the pipeline. What you have to do is you've got to stop the problem where it starts. In those countries where conflict is happening because of injustice, conflict is happening, yes, because of climate change, and climate change and the whole desertification of lands, the change causes a movement of people. The flooding causes a movement of people. And that causes conflict, and that causes...
What's the solution?
Let me just interject first, just to be clear of what the Archbishop said previously. This was specifically, his previous intervention was to do with the rhetoric that he identified, where he said that the term people arriving as invaders was harmful. That was his previous intervention. Just to update you, he's gone on to say in the Lords, he agreed with the sentiment of the Liberal Democrat bid to block the legislation. This, I think, was Lord Paddock, but added, it is our duty to change, not to throw out the bill. So basically he's saying he's not trying to stop the bill as the Liberal Democrat move was, that he's accepted that democratic process. But going on to say, I urge the government to reconsider much of the bill which fails to live up to our history, our moral responsibility and our political and international interests, i.e. this could be damaging to Britain's position in the world.
Well, other countries have taken fairly robust lines on this, not least the US over various periods, most notably Australia. Australia is not cast out as some sort of international pariah for wanting to maintain its borders and having a choice as to who comes in. So the world has changed far too dramatically. If you want open borders, then promote that as an example, as your policy. It seems to me, all I hear from Labour is that seems to be the policy it wishes for.
No, not at all.
The policy of the Conservative government is let's have managed migration from appropriate places. We've got illegal and safe routes. We open them up from Syria and Afghanistan and most notably Ukraine.
Let's bring in Barry in while Justice Reverend Justin Welby's still speaking. But yes, to reply.
First point. 13 years this government has had as its priority in its manifesto to control immigration in the way that Craig has said. They haven't managed to do it by increasing authoritarian measures. This is the latest in a failed list. The second point I would make is, let me give you an example. A constituent of mine whose family were called in Afghanistan under Operation Pitting to come out to join him here in the UK. Because of the bomb blast, they weren't able to. We have been battling with the Home Office since then to try and assist his family, his children, one of whom has now, a girl of 16, drunk poison and committed suicide because she is in such fear of living there. The others trying to come here to the UK, and it has taken me months of wrangling with the Home Office, who don't want to know, even to get the fee waiver for the family visitor visa to come.
So the paperwork, the bureaucracy.
This is a government that has absolutely lost control of its immigration policy. It has not worked, and it has now got to the point in the Home Office where they're not even trying to do the right thing.
We'll have to leave it there. Craig, thank you too for both being with us. Just update you very quickly. The Archbishop saying we need a bill to reform migration, we need a bill to stop the boats, we need a bill to destroy the evil tribe of traffickers. The tragedy is, without much change, this is not that bill. More coming up on that at the top of the hour. Stay with us on GB News Live.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie Shuttleworth from the Met Office. We'll see more heavy showers across the UK throughout this afternoon that will feel pretty warm in any sunshine, but it's still going to be quite an unsettled day, and that's because we've got low pressure in charge for the next couple of days at least. But as we head into the weekend, we will start to see things settle down. But the area of low pressure is building showers through the afternoon, particularly across northern areas, across western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. But we'll also see some quite slow moving showers across northern and eastern areas of England too. Showers will move through a little quicker across the southwest, so here we'll see the best of any sunshine. And in the sunshine, it will feel quite warm, particularly across southern areas, highs of up to about 19 degrees. Through this evening, showers will linger across the east, particularly East Anglia could see some quite long-lasting showers into this evening, and we'll see more persistent rain arrive into Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. But for many, it will settle down, leaving a relatively dry night, some mist and fog around, and temperatures around average for the time of year overnight by the time we get to Thursday morning. So Thursday morning will start off a little drier, though we could see some cloud lingering around and some drizzly rain across any high ground and some coastal areas. But once the sun gets going into the afternoon, we'll see showers bubble up once again. Now notice across the east in particular is where we're going to see those showers developing into the afternoon, and they could last quite a while. There's a risk of thunder and hail in there too. But again, in any sunshine, it will feel relatively warm for the time of year. Then through Thursday evening, once again, we'll see showers continue, but this time across more western areas, into parts of South Wales and into southern counties. We'll then start to see this low cloud from the North Sea encroach into eastern areas. But across the west, as we look ahead to the weekend, it will turn drier and brighter. I'll see you later.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m.
as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 1 o'clock. A very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Wednesday lunchtime, the publisher of Mirror Group newspapers apologising to Prince Harry for illegal information gathering at the start of his hacking case. We're live at the court, where the Duke of Sussex is one of several high-profile figures bringing claims against Mirror Group newspapers. Morally unacceptable. The Archbishop of Canterbury launches a scathing attack on the government's illegal migration bill, despite the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, claiming the legislation is the will of the people. And Sir Keir Starmer taunts the Prime Minister over the local election results, saying he's further added to the unemployment figures with Conservative councillors. Rishi Sunak said Sir Keir wasn't a softie, he was a flaky too. And also coming up, the doctor will see you now for a bit of practice. Will apprentice medics be the way to cure the NHS staffing crisis or create a different set of problems for the patient? All that coming up. First, let's get the latest headlines with Bethany.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. Here's your top stories from the GB newsroom at 1:01. At the High Court, Mirror Group newspapers has unreservedly apologised to the Duke of Sussex for unlawfully gathering information. The publisher of the Daily and Sunday Mirror has agreed some compensation is due and also vowed that this conduct will never be repeated. Damage claims are being brought against the tabloid by Prince Harry and other celebrities, including former Girls Aloud singer Cheryl, the estate of George Michael, and footballer Ian Wright. The Archbishop of Canterbury has condemned the government's illegal migration bill in a rare intervention in the House of Lords. The controversial legislation aims to detain and promptly remove people who arrive in the UK in small boats. It also looks to limit the ability of European Court of Human Rights in preventing the deportation of asylum seekers. In its first reading in the House of Lords, the Most Reverend Justin Welby says the bill treats those arriving in the UK as invaders.
It is a siloed bill, not a whole-of-government bill. It does not draw in conflict management and prevention, which drives migration. It does not draw in climate impacts, which drive migration and conflict. It is isolationist. It is morally unacceptable and politically impractical.
Sir Keir Starmer has criticised Rishi Sunak, saying he no longer has a mandate to run the country. That's in the first Prime Minister's question since the local elections in England. The Conservative Party lost control of 48 councils and more than 1,000 council seats, while the Labour Party gained more than 500 and the Liberal Democrats took control over more than 400. The Prime Minister defended the results, saying a general election holds far more significance. But the Labour leader insisted he's lost the confidence of voters up and down the country.
Last year, he lost a Tory beauty contest to the member for South West Norfolk, who then lost to a lettuce. Last week, when he finally came into contact with voters, he lost everywhere. No matter who the electorate is, the Prime Minister keeps entering a two-horse race and somehow finishing third. Given his track record, who does he think he's actually got a mandate from?
Mr. Speaker, it's a bit rich to hear about mandates from the person who's broken every single promise he was elected on. I mean, go through the list, Mr. Speaker. Nationalisations, NHS outsourcing, universal credit, and now tuition fees. Mr. Speaker, he was for them all before he was against them. He's not just a softie, he's a flaky too.
A US jury has found former President Donald Trump sexually abused a magazine writer in the 1990s and then defamed her by branding her a liar. He's been ordered to pay nearly £4 million in damages to the columnist E. Jean Carroll. Mr. Trump will not face a prison sentence as the trial was a civil case. Ms. Carroll said the verdict is a victory for every woman who suffered because she was not believed. Mr. Trump has called it a disgrace and says he'll appeal. In Pakistan, almost 1,000 supporters of the former Prime Minister Imran Khan have been arrested since clashes with police began yesterday. The former cricketer was arrested by anti-corruption police, and local media are now reporting his former Secretary-General has also been taken into custody. Over 130 police officers have been injured, 25 police vehicles have been set alight, and dozens of government buildings looted in the Punjab province. Documents relating to the decades-old unsolved murder of Daniel Morgan have been discovered by the Metropolitan Police. The paperwork was found in a locked cabinet at New Scotland Yard that apparently hadn't been used for a number of years. The force says some of the material should have been published to Daniel Morgan's independent panel when it was conducting its final report in 2021. Daniel John Morgan was a British private investigator who was murdered with an axe in London in 1987. A charity is warning poor diabetes care could be linked to more than 7,000 excess deaths in England last year. Diabetes UK says the figure is 13% higher than pre-pandemic levels and could be due to the backlog in routine care. The charity has also found less than half of 11,000 people living with the condition have received all of the necessary checks over the past 2 years. The number of households in temporary accommodation has reached more than 100,000. That's the highest level in nearly 2 decades. Official figures show more than 101,000 households were living in short-term accommodation at the end of December, a figure not seen since 2004. It's an increase of 5.2% from the year before. You're up to date on GB News. Now it's back to Mark.
Bethany, thank you very much indeed. So, the publishers of Mirror newspapers apologising in court to Prince Harry for what they described as illegal information gathering, which they acknowledge warrants compensation. Though we should add, they have denied what's called voicemail interception or phone hacking, in other words. Well, Prince Harry, among a group of high-profile figures suing Mirror Group newspapers over those claims of illegal intervention. Let's get the latest now with our national reporter Paul Hawkins, who has been following these events in court. And Paul, this was a dramatic start with, I think, written evidence before we even heard from any of the defence.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. So let's begin with that. Essentially, both sides in this case, the legal team representing the claimants and the legal team representing Mirror Group newspapers, they put out there what they call their skeleton statements. That is essentially giving their version of the stories. So the claimants alleging the unlawful gathering of information about their own lives and about phone hacking. The defendants, the Mirror Group newspapers, saying that no phone hacking happened, but then amongst their skeleton statement there was that admission that actually there was some evidence, and I'll use the words, some evidence of the instruction of third parties, that is private investigators, to engage in other types of unlawful information gathering in respect of each of these claimants. Now, there are 4 claimants, test cases that have been pulled out of a wider pool of claimants. One of them is Prince Harry. One of them is the actor Michael Turner, a Coronation Street actor. Now, Mirror Group newspapers say that they admit that there is some evidence that private investigators were used with regards to obtaining information about the claimants apart from Michael Turner. It denies involvement in the case of him, but Mirror Group newspapers saying it does warrant compensation, although it doesn't outline what that compensation is. They've unreservedly apologised and say that it will never be repeated again. Now, once that bombshell had dropped via paper, we then heard and this is going to take two and a half days, the opening statements from David Sherborne. He's the lawyer representing the claimants. He said that unlawful information gathering was both habitual and widespread at Mirror Group newspapers from 1991 to 2011. Now, at the heart of this, as we hear evidence, phone records, voicemails, emails, memos, documents, evidence from whistleblowers, is not just what happened at Mirror Group newspapers, it's also who knew about it and did they try to cover it up. Now, the court was shown memos between management at Mirror Group newspapers, which David Sherborne said demonstrates their extensive knowledge of the use of private investigators. The scale and extent of the unlawful methods, he said, were an integral part of their modus operandi. Journalists, desk heads, deputy editors and editors themselves, including Piers Morgan, who was editor of the Daily Mirror from 1995 to 2004, he said used or ordered the use of the unlawful means. Now, we should say that Piers Morgan has always strenuously denied any knowledge of phone hacking at the paper. Mirror Group newspapers, according to the lawyer David Sherborne, he said then continued to use private investigations even though they'd been already convicted for illegally obtaining private information. And he cited a number of examples, including someone called Rachel Barry, who was convicted in 1997, and the day after her conviction, he says documents proved that Mirror Group newspapers were using her to obtain information illegally. So some real bombshells this morning on the opening 2.5 days of this 7-week trial. We are expecting Prince Harry to appear in court in June, and of course that would be the first appearance by a senior royal in the witness box of a courtroom since really the 19th century, so in modern times, and that will be one not to avoid.
Previous, as we see, court appearances, but in pre-trial circumstances rather than the full evidence coming through. I'm just looking at what Andrew Green, the KC, the King's Counsel for MGN, has said, and that is that voicemail interception, or current, what we call phone hacking, denied in the trial cases, including Prince Harry's. So this term, in terms of the unlawful gathering of information, relates, it seems, to these private investigators.
Yeah, and we've heard documentation produced by David Sherborne, the lawyer for the claimants in court this morning, invoices by a number of private investigators, invoicing the Daily Mirror to try and obtain information about the clients. So we know that they were used, and indeed Mirror Group newspapers has admitted their use, but it still continues to deny phone hacking in relation to these cases. We know that in the past it has admitted there's some limited liability when it comes to obtaining information unlawfully, and indeed that's cost Mirror Group newspapers hundreds of thousands of pounds in compensation. But in relation to these claims, it denies phone hacking, but this morning it has admitted some liability when it comes to using third parties, such as private investigations, to obtain information unlawfully.
So therefore, even though they've unreservedly apologised and assured the claimants that conduct will never be repeated and accepted, obviously, that there may have to be a payment, the trial itself will continue. All this other evidence will be gone through in full.
Yeah, because even though they've admitted to some use of third parties, such as private investigators, they still deny the phone hacking allegations which the claimants are putting to them. The 4 claimants which have been pulled out of that wider pool of high-profile individuals. So the case will continue to go on for the next 6 to 7 weeks, and as I say, we will hear from Prince Harry in June.
Indeed. Paul, thanks very much for taking us through that. Just a little bit more coming through, as Paul was just indicating there to us, is barrister David Sherborne saying that the case featured unlawful activities on an industrial scale carried out across 3 newspapers over a period of about 20 years or so. We'll keep you updated, of course, as we get more evidence in that case. Now, to the House of Lords, where the Archbishop of Canterbury has condemned the government's illegal migration bill, the legislation aiming to detain and promptly remove people who arrive in the UK on those small boats. Well, Justin Welby spoke of the failure in the bill to deal with migration at source and then the long-term factors driving the problem.
This bill fails utterly to take a long-term and strategic view of the challenges of migration and undermines international cooperation, rather than taking an opportunity for the UK to show leadership, as we did in 1951. Even if this bill succeeded in temporarily stopping the boats, and I don't think it will, it won't stop conflict or climate migration. The IPCC forecasts that climate change by itself, let alone the conflicts it's already causing, will lead to at least 800 million more refugees a year in total by 2050. I urge the government to reconsider much of the bill which fails to live up to our history, our moral responsibility and our political and international interests.
Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, speaking in the House of Lords a little earlier. Downing Street has just been speaking to reporters, saying it's defended the bill as a compassionate and fair measure after that legislation condemned, of course, by the Archbishop. Asked whether the Prime Minister believed Justin Welby's intervention was appropriate, the Prime Minister's official spokesman saying, obviously it's right that the Lords are able to scrutinise the bill, but the government, for its part, will continue to robustly defend it. Let's speak now to our Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood, who's joining us in the studio. It's an interesting assessment, if you like, by Justin Welby, in that he's not saying that the bill itself should be stopped, and obviously the democratic process has to be gone through, but indicating perhaps it's addressing the wrong things.
This is the divide that we've seen today in the House of Lords. The debate was opened, of course, by the government, saying that this bill needs to go through to stop this very real problem that most people accept is happening in the Channel. The Lib Dems and Lord Pannick has stood up to say that this should be stopped in its entirety, that this bill should be thrown out, and he put down a motion to do that.
And he's the Liberal Democrat who was a former senior policeman, of course.
Indeed, and this is the Liberal Democrat position on they should throw out the bill. However, Lord Coker, who stood up for the Labour Party, he spoke third in the chamber. He said that it would be wrong for the unelected House to throw out a bill from the elected House, and instead that the House of Lords, as a revising chamber, should revise this legislation and should, what many people would describe as fundamentally change it. That's the position that the Archbishop, Lord Welby, has taken up as well. He's siding with the Labour Party on this. Indeed, he praised Lord Coker in his speech. Yeah,
it's an interesting direct quote here. We need a bill to stop the boats. This is the Archbishop. We need a bill to destroy the evil tribe of traffickers. The tragedy is that without much change, this is not that bill. The bill fails to take a long-term and strategic view of the challenges of migration and undermines international cooperation rather than taking an opportunity for the UK to show leadership. So one wonders what sort of additions there may be put in terms of this bill going through the Lords for the Archbishop and others to be happy about it.
Well, it's a curious one, because on the one hand, lots of people who've spoken today in the upper house have said that there should be some sort of bill to stop the boats. However, on each of the propositions that the government has put forward to try and stop the boats, there seems to have been problems with them. Now, whether it's detaining people who have arrived illegally, whether it's any of the more forceful mechanisms to try and deter...
Unaccompanied minors as well. That was a real sticking point for many of them.
And that will be one of the most profound amendments that is laid down, one of the ones that is likely to pass and enter into this sort of parliamentary ping-pong that we've become used to, whereby the Lords, which of course doesn't have a Conservative majority, throws a piece of legislation back to the House of Commons, which does. But it is interesting listening to Justin Welby's speech there in the House of Lords. He did seem to be confused on a point that I've been looking into, and that's he mentioned that there would be 800 million climate refugees a year by 2050. Now, anyone that can do some quick maths in their head might think that that would be the entire population of the world within a decade or so.
That's a lot of boats.
It's a lot of boats.
Yeah.
And so I looked... He claimed this came from the IPCC, the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and I've been looking through their latest report. It seems that the Archbishop has got confused in his numbers, and instead the 800 million figure in the latest IPCC report is a figure to do with water scarcity if global warming reaches 2 degrees Celsius. So that's not a figure to do with the number every year who will move as climate refugees, as the Archbishop suggested.
Now he's used the term moral as well. Remember, his last intervention was about the rhetoric that he had decried, saying that the use of the term invaders was harmful rhetoric. He's taking a more technical approach this time, and one wonders how much the government is likely to bend or can bend in terms of what the Lords add to this before it goes back to the Commons.
Yeah, this is definitely setting up for creating a coalition within the House of Lords. Welby wants to contribute to something that is likely to pass and then could actually change that legislation. That's the same attitude we're seeing from the Labour Party. Unlike the sort of slash-and-burn attitude we've seen from the Lib Dems, sort of just throw it all out, they do want to make some key changes. The government, however, says that if this bill is, in their view, watered down in any way, for example, on these child refugee provisions, because we've seen that some people come to the United Kingdom claiming to be children when they're not actually, and the government is worried that this child refugee sort of set of amendments would make it harder to determine who is a genuine child refugee and who isn't. The government is concerned that any of these provisions would water down. However, on the other side, you get the sort of Coker and Welby side of things who are trying to make this broad coalition to make it more palatable to pass.
OK, thank you for taking us through events in the House of Lords, the other place, as it were. But, of course, let's reflect, too, that we've had events in the Commons, in the Chamber for PMQs, and we can actually bring in our political editor. I'm afraid we can't do that at the moment, but let me just update you with what was taking place at PMQs, where we saw, obviously, the Labour leader indicating that the employment situation had been made more difficult for the government by the fact that 1,000 Conservative councillors, of course, lost their seats in those local elections. But certainly Rishi Sunak coming back on the attack to say that Sir Keir Starmer was not just a softie, he was Sir Flaky too. I think we can now speak to Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. No. Still can't do that. Anyway, let's just reflect on what happened in PMQs a little earlier. This was the exchange across the dispatch box.
This time last week, the Prime Minister had to correct the record on misleading claims he made about employment numbers. Can he provide a further update? Now he's cost 1,000 Tory councillors their jobs.
With regard to the local elections, Mr. Speaker, maybe I can just offer the honourable gentleman a tiny bit of advice from one of his predecessors, Tony Blair, who I was reading the other day. What did Tony Blair? He said the right honourable gentleman can be as cocky as he likes about the local elections. Come a general election, policy counts. And we know, Mr. Speaker. The problem for him is he doesn't have any.
Said he was going to lose 1,000 seats, and then he managed it. After 13 years, a Tory promise they actually haven't broken. And this is the Prime Minister who's only had to fight for 2 things in his life. Last year, he lost a Tory beauty contest to the member for South West Norfolk, who then lost to a lettuce. Last week, when he finally came into contact with voters, he lost everywhere. No matter who the electorate is, the Prime Minister keeps entering a 2-horse race and somehow finishing 3rd. Given his track record, who does he think he's actually got a mandate from?
It's a bit rich to hear about mandates from the person who's broken every single promise he was elected on. I mean, go through the list, Mr. Speaker. Nationalisations, NHS outsourcing, universal credit, and now tuition fees. Mr. Speaker, he was for them all before he was against them. He's not just Sir Softy, he's Sir Flaky too.
And this is the price of having a tired, worn-out government fronted by a Prime Minister who boasts he's never had a working-class friend. He's smiling his way through the cost of living crisis, gloating about success while waiting lists grow. He's pretending that crime, house building, schools are all just doing fine, while handing the country 24 tax rises, all with his name on them. How does he think the Tories can possibly provide the answers Britain needs when the whole country has already told him they're the problem, not the solution?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is right. We all do say some silly things when we're younger. I was a teenager, and he'll know what I'm talking about, because I think in his 40s he was still talking about abolishing the monarchy, Mr. Speaker.
Right, well, that was a pretty feisty session there from PMQs, of course, with the personal tax. Let's just update you a bit of breaking news we're getting from Downing Street. And clearly, after PMQs, the Prime Minister's press secretary speaks to reporters. Downing Street has refused to rule out a Tory coalition with the DUP or other parties, depending on the results of the next general election. That's just coming through from that briefing, because, of course, we have heard these suggestions of a possible Lib-Lab pact after the election. So clearly the battle lines being drawn for any forthcoming election. Also coming up, we'll be reflecting on the tens of thousands of medics who could be earning while they learn in a bid to tackle the workforce shortages in the NHS. Would you be happy to be treated by a practising doctor, practising in a different way? Latest on that in a moment. Stay with us.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m.
as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, tens of thousands of medics, including doctors, could soon earn while they learn, all in a bid to tackle the workforce shortages within the NHS. Yes, apprenticeship schemes to be expanded over the coming years to give students the chance to bypass university and earn a wage while they're studying instead. The scheme could help to train up to 1 in 10 doctors, we're told, and 1 in 3 nurses. Let's get the views now of an NHS junior doctor, Dr. Kiran Mujara, who presumably has spent a rather long time going through university and all the other add-on learnings to get where you are. Do you feel a bit shortchanged by this?
I have, yeah. Thanks for having me on, Mark. And in terms of that, my training so far has been 5 years at medical school. Often people will spend 6 years at medical school. And then after that, I've worked for 5 years as an NHS junior doctor. And I think we need to understand the problem. And the problem is, like you mentioned earlier, which is that there's such staff shortages in the NHS at the moment. The number of GPs down 7% since 2016. The number of patients is increasing, more complex patients, more elderly patients with lots of medications, lots of medical problems. So the workload is going up, but the number of doctors is decreasing. And doctors are finding it stressful. They're going abroad, they are working part-time, and that's putting a lot of pressure on the people that are staying and are already in the system.
Yeah.
And so this is the government's response to that, is that they want to basically, they're saying that, it takes 5 years to become a doctor. Can we put people on the ground now to try and work within these roles? And I think, we don't have the full details of it. There is a similar scheme that is available for nurses as well.
Yes.
And once we have the details of it, if the education that you get is similar, it could be a good option for many people.
Yeah, the BMA has said there are huge questions on this. Little evidence, they say, that the apprentice model will work at scale. And I'm just wondering, how will you actually pick up that experience on the wards in the operating theatres when the junior doctors and the consultants are so busy anyway, just trying to sort of triage everything and keep the system going?
Yeah, you're right. And I think, there are apprenticeships for other jobs which are 100% practical, in which you can go into, you can learn to do that job, and you can do that job. But I think medicine is slightly different in that it's a lot of theory based, and you need to have a core understanding of a lot of the principles to then be able to apply that to practice. And that is why in most medical schools, the first few years are spent understanding the physiology, the pharmacology, the anatomy, the communication skills before you then go out into the world of hospitals. I think if there was a way that was incorporated into this program, which I'm sure there is a plan to do that, then I don't see why it couldn't be a good option. But again, like you said, and like the reservations that the BMA has, it needs to be of the same standard as medical school for those people to be able to practice as doctors.
Yeah, but if that's the case, why not just carry on with the existing system and make sure people have some kind of financial incentive to get them through that training?
Yeah, good question. And I think a couple of things. I think the financial incentive is certainly one of them. So, for example, if you were from a lower income household and medicine was never an option for you because you couldn't afford, because yes, there's a tuition fee loan, but you still have to pay to actually live there. You need somewhere to live, you need to eat, you need to stay there. So if you could work and earn and provide whilst doing that training, that's certainly one incentive that I don't see coming to the traditional model of medical school. The other one is that actually, you make that decision to become a doctor so young. At 16 years old, you're getting work experience, you go to medical school at 18, and it's a huge life and financial commitment. So to actually be able to enter this role, and actually if 3 months in, 4 months in, you actually decide, I've worked in this and maybe it's not for me, that could actually, be helpful in those circumstances.
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, have there been times when you've actually questioned your decision to go this route?
I think in everyone's career, there has to be. I think certainly the pressures over the past few years, coming home from work absolutely exhausted, getting up at the crack of dawn to actually go into the hospital and not feeling like there's always that appreciation for that sometimes. But I think ultimately there's no other job that you're intellectually stimulated. You feel like you're making a difference and you're speaking to people every single day and learning their stories.
And saving lives along the way as well. Dr. Kiran Majara, thank you very much indeed for joining us here in GB News once more. Do appreciate it. Well, more reaction coming up to that and to, of course, what we've been hearing in the House of Lords and the House of Commons. It's all happening. More reaction in a moment, but let's get all the latest news headlines for you now.
Good afternoon, I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom at 33 minutes past 1. At the High Court, Mirror Group Newspapers has unreservedly apologised to the Duke of Sussex and other claimants for illegal information gathering. The publisher of the Daily and Sunday Mirror has agreed some compensation is due and also promised this conduct would never be repeated. Damage claims are being brought against the tabloid by Prince Harry and other celebrities, including former Girls Aloud singer Cheryl, the estate of George Michael and footballer Ian Wright. The Archbishop of Canterbury has condemned the government's illegal migration bill in a rare intervention in the House of Lords. The controversial legislation aims to detain and promptly remove people who arrive in the UK in small boats. It also looks to limit the ability of the European Court of Human Rights in preventing the deportation of asylum seekers. Downing Street says the bill is compassionate and fair, but the Most Reverend Justin Welby says it treats those arriving in the UK as invaders. Sir Keir Starmer has criticised Rishi Sunak, saying he no longer has a mandate to run the country in the first Prime Minister's questions since the local elections in England. The Conservative Party lost control of 48 councils and more than 1,000 council seats, while the Labour Party gained more than 500. The Prime Minister defended the results, saying a general election holds far more significance. And Donald Trump says he'll appeal after a jury found he sexually abused a woman and then defamed her by calling her a liar. E. Jean Carroll, a columnist, claimed the former US president attacked her in the 1990s. The civil lawsuit rejected her claim of rape but upheld her other accusations, ordering Mr. Trump to pay nearly £4 million in damages. Ms. Carroll called the verdict a victory for every woman who suffered because she was not believed. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Back to Mark in just a moment, but first here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2615 and €1.1520. The price of gold is £1,608.20 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,753 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m.
as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Channel Britain.
And welcome back to GB News Live. So Donald Trump's been ordered to pay a magazine columnist nearly £4 million in damages after a jury in the US found that he did sexually abuse her back in the 1990s. The juries in New York also finding that the former president had defamed E. Jean Carroll by branding her a liar, saying that her claims were a hoax. Well, Trump repeatedly denied allegations of sexual misconduct, calling the verdict itself a disgrace.
I have absolutely no idea who this woman is. The verdict is a disgrace, a continuation of the greatest witch hunt of all time.
Let's speak now to Errol Morcoach, who's Vice Chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Thank you very much indeed for your time. He may think it's a witch hunt. Unfortunately, it is a jury and their decision stands, and he is now, even though it's a civil case, is basically indicated that he's a guilty man.
Well, I mean, it certainly appears that the Democrat Party has put in all stops trying to make sure that he is the Republican nominee. Because while this is, on face value, a loss for Donald Trump, and he is his own worst enemy in many ways, this is galvanizing the base and the support of all the people who he is told, look, they're going to come after me. I'm witch hunt, all these things, don't know this person. Look at all these cases they're bringing. They can't get me in a criminal court. And so now you have a situation where the Democrat Party is using all of these lawsuits. Each lawsuit is dragging Trump through the mud for the moderate voter, and it's galvanizing the base to support him, which means he is more likely to become the nominee, and the Democrat Party doesn't feel like they can beat Ron DeSantis. So
Can I just interrupt? Why do you assume that a jury in a civil case are all Democrat voters?
In Manhattan, it's 88% Democrat voters. Probably they would vote to hang him in the street if they could. And in a civil case, you don't need to prove beyond reasonable doubt as well. The judge was instructed the jury that because Donald Trump just sent in a video deposition, he didn't attend. In a civil case in America, you're allowed to use that against the defendant, and he's going to appeal. Now, if I would say the same thing, if Joe Biden got taken to some Mecklenburg County courthouse in rural Virginia and was tried in civil case for some nonsense or whatever, they could find the exact same thing, because we do have this breakdown in the American court justice system, and this kangaroo court, banana republic behavior is scary.
Yeah, well, you can call it kangaroo court, but due legal process has taken place. And one reflects that in terms of the way he approached the case, when he says that this lady was not his type, he then mistakenly identifies a photo of her as his former wife. Not too clever, was it?
No, once again, he is his own worst enemy and his own biggest promoter. It's this weird dichotomy, his own Hegelian master-slave dialectic. He seems to defeat himself and prop himself up at the same time. But in the end, none of that deposition helped him, especially when he told the woman who was interviewing him that he didn't fancy her either. I mean, what are you doing, man?
Let's take this forward then about the political consequence of this. I know that one Republican senator, John Cornyn in Texas, says you can win, obviously with your power base in terms of a party nomination. You can't win a general election with just your power base. So, has he now damaged himself in terms of actually taking Biden on for a successful run for the White House?
I think yes, but he has damaged himself every single month that he was president and every single month that he ran for president. And it seems like, there's a reason why they call him the Teflon Don to some degree. But your point is incredibly valid, because the middle America voter was actually the female vote is what got him out in 2020.
Yes.
Now you have a situation where the country has really started to have societal and economic collapse. And now people are looking back like, hey, you know what? I have friends who tell me, I went from like a lower class to middle class, and I can tell that I'm back down. Like, there was economic growth and people felt it, and now they're feeling the pressure. And Donald Trump's 4 years were the greatest economic period in our time. So that might be what saves it.
You've touched on something very important, and I think they're looking at I think they're the so-called soccer mums, the suburban female floating voters that will be essential for getting him into the White House. Now, surely this and perhaps other legal cases to come are going to turn them off voting for Republican Donald Trump. Is Ron DeSantis just going to hold on and wait and see which way the wind blows before coming out and saying this is not the right man for the presidency?
Absolutely, and that's what Governor DeSantis has been doing. I'm a Florida resident; he's my governor, and I do support him in great measure. But I think that he's going to have to fight Donald Trump for that nominee. Donald Trump's not going to give it to him. Donald Trump came in and destroyed basically the old Republican Party. He used to be a registered Democrat, and if you want to take this away from him, you have to be a better candidate to the base. You can't run as in a primary as a general election and be like, I'm the most generally electable candidate. So that's where DeSantis needs to choose, because if he makes a mistake here and they lose with DeSantis, because they're going to run the same campaign against DeSantis they would run against Trump, then it's going to be like, well, you just sidelined the only sitting president to ever run again. If they let Trump run and lose, at least they can say it's all on Trump. But right now, DeSantis has to actually come out and be a man and say, I'm going to fight you for it. And he doesn't seem to yet be wanting to get into that pugilistic.
We shall watch that space. Fascinating stuff. Errol, thank you very much indeed for joining us and taking us through the permutations, as it were. Thank you for your time. Now, Northern Ireland's largest agricultural food event starts today, a 4-day event now showcasing some of the finest produce that the province has to offer, but also an annual chance for the industry to gauge its problems. Dougie Beattie can give us a taste of the opening day.
One of the biggest days in Northern Ireland's rural communities calendar is now underway. The Balmoral Show has been on the go since the 1800s and gives the farming community from both sides of the border the chance to come together, compete and compare. Operations Director Ron DeGeary is responsible for making it all happen.
A lot of hard work and planning, and really the last sort of 6 to 8 weeks is when it all comes together. After one show's over, we start to plan for next year, inviting our judges, looking at the trade stands, inviting them to apply again over the coming months, and also drawing our plans and getting everything ready for the following year's show.
This show is not just about farming, and traders come from all parts of the UK and Ireland.
It's a very good show. There's plenty of people here, plenty of people spending money, and it's probably one of the best shows that I actually do myself, to be honest, at the whole of the UK, so it's definitely worth the trip over.
Many of Northern Ireland's top companies and farms are on display, and all must look their best. This is Ballinderry Roxy Lady. She's only 6 weeks old and is looking forward to her first show.
We'd like to get some success in the show ring on the cattle lawns with both the Limousin and the Ballinderry Dexters. So my son's Limousin here, this is his project. He's currently at home studying for his second year in biochemistry at Queen's, but he'll be on the cattle lawn tomorrow with this Limousin, it's his.
And what do you think its chances are?
When you're on the lawn, you're always in with a chance.
Just a bit of a buzz. I suppose we're all year, we're here hopefully trying to succeed and breed cattle to sell throughout the rest of the year. It's our shop window for everybody to see our breed, see our cattle.
Obviously, the show is where we try to get our mileage and trying to promote not only the animals but also the breed itself, because it's very important to have their promotional job for the breed. It is nice, obviously, to get nice red rosettes, but at the end of the day, it's about breed promotion.
The 154th Balmoral Show opens its doors today and is confident that it will remain the big attraction. Dougie Beattie, GB News.
Well, Doogie giving us a taste there. We can join him live now at the Balmoral show. And Doogie, we say a taste, but of course a bit of a bitter taste for many farmers when we look at this rural industry and the challenges it's facing financially and politically as well.
Indeed, Mark, it very much does. And people forget that this isn't just a family or a community. This is actually a multi-million-pound business. And tomorrow we're looking at the possibility of interest rates rising. Some of these farms wouldn't be uncommon to have as much as a £1 million overdraft. And you can imagine 0.25% in an interest rate and what sort of effect it will have there. But also we're talking about food security. And the reason these shows are so good is because you have all three parts of the food chain here in the one place. You have the farmers that supply the raw materials, you have the food producers who actually put it all together and package it, and then of course you have the retailers. And over the last year we have watched the price of food rocket, and we're trying to have a look here to see where that is actually coming in the food chain. We know for a fact it's not with the farmers. Their input costs are so high at this minute in time, and of course when you have the likes of Brazil just a week ago, they're letting loose an amazing amount of soy marketplace that's really hitting things like maize and corn, and that will also come down to many other products that go into the animal food chain.
Right.
And the farmers are still recovering from the high prices last year that they had to pay for fertiliser, and that's not so. When farmers work, it doesn't matter when it comes, the prices that come down are still a year behind when the farmers have actually had to use it.
And of course, we've seen the problems then of the price in grocery baskets as a result of all the raw materials and those other aspects feeding through to the system. So this could actually have a knock-on effect for the grocery baskets next year, what people are paying at the shops.
It most definitely will. There's no doubt about it. We will not see food inflation take any significant steps downwards again until this year's crops are through. Last year I was reporting that combine harvesters, instead of being £600 a day to run, they were. You've got to remember that barley that was harvested then is now only appearing in the food chain here for these cattle. So it's the food of our food, if you like, and that cost has to be absorbed, and it's being absorbed at the checkouts by the consumers. And next year, the year after that, it may indeed come down if prices fall. But you're asking farmers really to absorb that amazing amount of disparity between each year, and they cannot afford it.
Yeah, double-digit increases, of course. Doogie, thank you very much for updating us there at the Balmoral show. And, of course, the best on show there. We'll update you in the next day or two as well as that continues. But let's now update you on the flash flooding, hailstorms and torrential rain in parts of southwest England, leading to a major incident being declared in Somerset. Some homes being evacuated because of mudslides. The Environment Agency warning further flooding could also be possible. The public being urged not to attempt to drive through the floodwaters, and you can see why there with these pictures of the extraordinary strength of those torrents running through areas. Let's speak now to Jeff Moody, who can join us at Queen Camel in Somerset, one of the worst hit villages. Are they able to clean up at the moment, Jeff, or are they still waiting for the next torrent to appear?
Well, the torrents do seem to have stopped for now, so the clean-up mission has begun. But it is a really big one. Here at the Camelicious Cafe, I don't know whether you can see, the floor is just covered in mud. We had a huge deluge of water that flooded through here last night, destroying virtually everything in one shape or another. Caroline, when you first came in this morning, what was it like?
Well, I think they had problems getting in the front door initially. Some of my staff came in before me, so I had to go around the back because all the floor had buckled, and you just couldn't open the door through the buckling of the floor and the furniture that's all around. And all the furniture had also moved, so when it had receded, the furniture had also moved with that. The fridges were on the floor. There was a freezer up on its side. Just devastation. Food everywhere. mud everywhere.
Now, this has been open since January. It's a real community project, isn't it? It works not only just to unite the community, but also as a way of learning, isn't it, for people in the community? This must be devastating for you.
Absolutely. So Able to Achieve, we support people through work-based learning. So Camelish is part of Able to Achieve Trust. And within the trust, we teach people with learning disabilities, life skills and work-based skills.
And how long do you think that the cafe will be out of action?
It's really hard to say because the water has gone so high, and also because the school being so old, you'll have floorboards underneath this floor. So I'm going to assume it's going to take a lot of time to clean and dry out.
I mean, it's not just about cleaning and drying out, is it? It's about the structural damage to the property itself.
Yeah, and the impact it will have on the community, because Queen Camel is slightly disconnected from Yeovil Town, although it's still part of Yeovil Town. The community here, with the buses are not so regular, and they do use this space as somewhere to connect with people, local people. And Old School itself, where Camelicious is, the community here is absolutely fantastic, and it's just devastating.
I mean, as you say, there is a very strong community. I've really seen that in action today, as everybody's sort of pitching in to try and help the situation. But you're going to need something more than just community spirit, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely. I think we're going to have to think about fundraising. I think we've got a lot of talent in Queen Camel and in Able to Achieve, and a lot of inspirational people. I'm sure we'll get there, but if people out there can come and help and back us, then I think, your help and support would be really, really appreciated.
What sort of help would you need?
Well, I think at the moment we can't have clean-up help because we don't actually know what we're dealing with, although we are just trying to manoeuvre things so they're easier to get rid of or to clean down. But I think I'll do a crowdfunding. Watch this space. So if you follow us on Facebook, Able to Achieve Limited, or The Winking Frog, then we'll keep you up to date with what we're doing. And
Caroline.
Old School have a Facebook page as well.
Brilliant, Caroline. Thank you very much, and very best of luck with the clean-up. One of the things that you can't really tell is the smell as well. The smell of the river right the way throughout the building is particularly strong.
Yeah, of course, it's not just the rain, the water, it's all the mud and muck that comes with it. But I think they've actually declared now a major incident for Somerset itself, Jeff. Does that mean that they might be able to get some extra help from central government?
Yes, absolutely. More help should be arriving. We've seen some help come in dribs and drabs this morning, but the hope now is that more help will be on their way now that it's been declared an incident. It's not just Somerset either. The conditions in parts of Devon have been extraordinary. I was caught in the most massive storm yesterday. The storms, they came out of nowhere. They were very, very intense in places too. But yes, the idea is that more help can now be arriving now that it's a critical incident.
Jeff, thank you very much indeed for that. Yes, half of the rainfall of May falling in just a few hours there yesterday. We'll update you on that, as we will on events both in the Lords and the Commons. Busy day of politics. That's coming up in the next hour. Stay with us on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie Shuttleworth from the Met Office. We'll see more heavy showers across the UK throughout this afternoon that will feel pretty warm in any sunshine, but it's still going to be quite an unsettled day, and that's because we've got low pressure in charge for the next couple of days at least. But as we head into the weekend, we will start to see things settle down. But the area of low pressure is building showers through the afternoon, particularly across northern areas, across western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. But we'll also see some quite slow-moving showers across northern and eastern areas of England too. Showers will move through a little quicker across the southwest, so here we'll see the best of any sunshine. And in the sunshine, it will feel quite warm, particularly across southern areas, highs of up to about 19 degrees. Through this evening, showers will linger across the east, particularly East Anglia could see some quite long-lasting showers into this evening, and we'll see more persistent rain arrive into Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. But for many, it will settle down, leaving a relatively dry night, some mist and fog around, and temperatures around average for the time of year. overnight by the time we get to Thursday morning. So Thursday morning will start off a little drier, though we could see some cloud lingering around and some drizzly rain across any high ground and some coastal areas. But once the sun gets going into the afternoon, we'll see showers bubble up once again. Now, notice across the east in particular is where we're going to see those showers developing into the afternoon, and they could last quite a while. There's a risk of thunder and hail in there too. But again, in any sunshine, it will feel relatively warm for the time of year. Then through Thursday evening, once again, we'll see showers continue, but this time across more western areas, into parts of South Wales and into southern counties. We'll then start to see this low cloud from the North Sea encroach into eastern areas. But across the west, as we look ahead to the weekend, it will turn drier and brighter. I'll see you later.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m.
as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us 4, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
And a very warm welcome to GB News at 2 o'clock. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Wednesday afternoon. And we can tell you that we have Prince Harry and the court case for hacking underway in the courts in London. The publisher Mirror newspaper is apologising for illegal information gathering. We'll be live with the paper saying its behaviour towards the Duke of Sussex warranted compensation. Morally unacceptable, the Archbishop of Canterbury launches a scathing attack on the government's illegal migration bill, despite the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, claiming that legislation is the will of the people. And Sir Keir Starmer taunts the Prime Minister over the local election results, saying he's further added to the unemployment figures with 1,000 Conservative councillors. Rishi Sunak saying Sir Keir wasn't just a softie, he was flaky too. Also coming up, a portrait fit for a king. We speak to the man behind the camera for the coronation portraits. Hugo Bernan joins us later this hour to put us all in the picture. First, the latest headlines coming up with Bethany.
Good afternoon, I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom at 2:03. The publisher of The Mirror has unreservedly apologised to the Duke of Sussex for unlawful information gathering. At the start of a trial over alleged phone hacking at the High Court, Mirror Group newspapers admitted that Prince Harry's legal challenge warrants compensation. The tabloid also promised the behaviour would never be repeated. Other high-profile figures involved in the trial include former Girls Aloud singer Cheryl, the estate of George Michael and footballer Ian Wright. The Archbishop of Canterbury has condemned the government's illegal migration bill in a rare intervention in the House of Lords. The controversial legislation aims to detain and promptly remove people who arrive in the UK in small boats. It also looks to limit the ability of the European Court of Human Rights in preventing the deportation of asylum seekers. Downing Street says the bill is compassionate and fair, but the Most Reverend Justin Welby says it treats migrants as invaders.
It is a siloed bill, not a whole-of-government bill. It does not draw in conflict management and prevention, which drives migration. It does not draw in climate impacts, which drive migration and conflict. It is isolationist. It is morally unacceptable and politically impractical.
Well, former Trade Secretary Lord Peter Lilly has told GB News the House of Lords has no option but to pass the bill.
It will have a tough time, but it will get through, because if the Lords were to stop the measures to stop the boat people, that would be the end of the House of Lords. Then it would commit suicide. The public wouldn't stand that.
You can watch that full exclusive interview with Lord Peter Lilly on Sunday at 6 p.m. on Gloria Meets. Sir Keir Starmer has criticised Rishi Sunak, saying he no longer has a mandate to run the country in the first Prime Minister's question since the local elections in England. The Conservative Party lost control of 48 councils and more than 1,000 council seats, while the Labour Party gained more than 500. The Prime Minister defended the results, saying a general election holds far more significance. But the Labour leader insisted he's lost the confidence of voters up and down the country.
Last year, he lost a Tory beauty contest to the member for South West Norfolk, who then lost to a lettuce. Last week, when he finally came into contact with voters, he lost everywhere. No matter who the electorate is, the Prime Minister keeps entering a two-horse race and somehow finishing third. Given his track record, who does he think he's actually got a mandate from?
Mr. Speaker, it's a bit rich to hear about mandates from the person who's broken every single promise he was elected on. I mean, go through the list, Mr. Speaker. Nationalisations, NHS outsourcing, universal credit, and now tuition fees. Mr. Speaker, he was for them all before he was against them. He's not just a softie, he's a flaky too.
Donald Trump says he'll appeal after a jury found he sexually abused a woman and then defamed her by calling her a liar. E. Jean Carroll, a columnist, claimed the former US president attacked her in the 1990s. The civil lawsuit rejected her claim of rape but upheld her other accusations, ordering Mr. Trump to pay nearly £4 million in damages. Miss Carroll called the verdict a victory for every woman who suffered because she was not believed. In Pakistan, almost 1,000 supporters of former Prime Minister Imran Khan have been arrested since clashes with police began yesterday. The former cricketer was arrested by anti-corruption police, and local media are reporting his former Secretary-General has also been taken into custody. Over 130 police officers have been injured, 25 police vehicles have been set alight, and dozens of government buildings looted in the Punjab province. Documents relating to the decades-old unsolved murder of Daniel Morgan have been discovered by the Metropolitan Police. The paperwork was found in a locked cabinet at New Scotland Yard that hadn't been used for a number of years. The force says some of the material should have been published to Daniel Morgan Independent Panel when it was conducting its final report in 2021. Daniel John Morgan was a British private investigator who was murdered with an axe in London in 1987. And a charity is warning poor diabetes care could be linked to more than 7,000 excess deaths in England last year. Diabetes UK says the figure is 13% higher than pre-pandemic levels and could be due to the backlog in routine care. The charity has also found less than half of 11,000 people living with the condition have received all of the necessary checks over the past 2 years. You're up to date on GB News. Now it's back to Mark.
Bethany, thank you very much indeed. So, extraordinary revelations in court today, with the publisher of the Mirror newspaper apologising in court to Prince Harry for what they described as illegal information gathering, which, quotes, warrants compensation. Prince Harry among a group of high-profile figures suing Mirror Group newspapers over claims of phone hacking. Now, the lawyer for the Mirror Group denies the phone hacking, but acknowledged private investigators had been involved. And then lawyers for Prince Harry is saying that there was a systemic use of these private investigators to unlawfully obtain private information, authorised, they claim, by senior editors, including Piers Morgan, who was editor at the Mirror at that time. Let's get more now with our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who is in court for us. And Paul, Prince Harry not attending as yet. He's due perhaps in a week or two, but already it seems that extraordinary things are being revealed by both sides in this case.
Yeah, he's not due to appear in court until the beginning of June, but there's an early victory for him because when we got into court this morning, before the case had even started and we were sent the skeleton arguments from each side, we read through it and we saw this surprising, huge admission, frankly, from Mirror Group newspapers inside that. And to quote them directly, there was some evidence of the instruction of third parties, as in private investigators, to engage in other types of unlawful information gathering in respect of each of the claimants. Now, we should just stress, by the way, there's this general group, this wide group of high-profile individuals that are bringing claims against the Mirror Group newspapers with respect to allegations of phone hacking and unlawfully gathering information to write stories about them. 4 test cases have been drawn from that group. One of them is Prince Harry. The other 3 are actors. The other 2 are actors, Michael Turner and Nikki Sanderson, and then you've got Fiona Whiteman, who's the former wife of the comedian Paul Whitehouse. So those are the 4 test cases drawn out, and effectively Mirror Group newspaper this morning saying there's some evidence that, yeah, third parties were used to gather information about these 3 of those 4 claimants. On the case of Michael Turner, they deny any involvement in any unlawful information gathering with respect to him, but they say the involvement of third parties with respect to the other 3, they say it warrants compensation. They've apologised and say that it will never be repeated. We should stress, though, that they deny any allegations of voicemail interception, i.e. phone hacking. So they're saying, OK, there's some evidence that we had private investigators involved, but we deny any allegations of phone hacking. Now, in the past, there have been some admissions that in some cases information was gathered unlawfully by Mirror Group newspaper, who represent the Daily Mirror, the Sunday Mirror and the Sunday People. And they've had to fork out hundreds of thousands of pounds worth in compensation for those individuals that were affected. On this occasion, they're saying, yes, some was gathered unlawfully and that will warrant compensation. They haven't said what that compensation will be, but it's certainly an early victory for Prince Harry.
Now, as I said, the legal team for Mirror Group newspapers denying the phone hacking as such, the interception of the phone calls of the phones. However, Prince Harry's legal team basically talking about this use of the private investigators on an industrial scale across all levels. And in the court documents, allegations that this started in 1991 and continued at least until 2011. And of course, during that period, Piers Morgan was the editor of The Mirror.
Yeah, and we should stress, Piers Morgan has always denied having anything to do with phone hacking, having any knowledge of phone hacking. He never undertook it himself, nor did he instruct anyone to do it, and one would have thought that he's sticking by those lines. But certainly we've seen evidence produced by David Sherborne. He's the lawyer representing the claimants this morning. He's produced various documentation from whistleblowers, evidence, invoices from private investigators to the Mirror Group. We heard this morning one invoice from one private investigator that was sent to gather information about Nikki Sanderson. She's the actress who, along with Michael Turner, both of them sitting at the back of court watching as proceedings continue inside the court today. But yeah, we've heard evidence of that. There's also whistleblowers, there are emails, there are memos. And it's not just about, and we should be clear about this, Mark, it's not just about what happened, it's about who knew about it and did they cover it up. And the allegation here is that journalists, desk heads, deputy editors and editors, including Piers Morgan, according to David Sherborne, they knew about this. But as we stress, Piers Morgan says he knew nothing about phone hacking and was not involved in it at the time.
Paul, for the moment, thank you for that. But of course, we'll update people with more in that extraordinary case as it starts, as Paul was saying, perhaps up to 7 weeks of evidence to come. Now, the Archbishop of Canterbury has condemned the government's illegal migration bill in the House of Lords. That legislation aiming, of course, to detain and then promptly remove people who arrive in the UK in small boats. But Justin Welby spoke of the bill's failure to deal with migration at source and indeed the long-term factors driving that problem.
This bill fails utterly to take a long-term and strategic view of the challenges of migration and undermines international cooperation, rather than taking an opportunity for the UK to show leadership, as we did in 1951. Even if this bill succeeded in temporarily stopping the boats, and I don't think it will, it won't stop conflict or climate migration. The IPCC forecasts that climate change by itself, let alone the conflicts it's already causing, will lead to at least 800 million more refugees a year in total by 2050. I urge the government to reconsider much of the bill, which fails to live up to our history, our moral responsibility, and our political and international interests.
So that was the Archbishop of Canterbury a little earlier. Let's get more now with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who can update us. And Darren, it's an interesting approach in that the Archbishop was saying that the bill itself should not be stopped because it's clearly part of the democratic process, but clearly trying to indicate it's addressing the wrong issues in terms of those people wanting to come here to Britain.
Yeah, indeed, and this is an argument that's made by many who oppose this bill, in essence, that they just don't think it's going to effectively work, that it's not going to act as the deterrent the government hopes in terms of trying to persuade those people who make that perilous journey across the English Channel that it is a sensible thing to do. And what he and others would like is the government to open up more safe routes, if you like. At the moment, there are safe routes for people from Afghanistan, Ukraine, from Hong Kong. And it must be said, when I say they, most peers, I think you'll find, and probably a substantial part of the Conservative Party would like to see that happen as well. It is something the government said they are prepared to look at. In fact, actually, a minister was saying that they are hoping that there will be more safe routes available to asylum seekers by the end of next year. But when you look at the language, it is undoubtedly provocative from the Archbishop of Canterbury today, talking about how he regards this as isolationist, morally unacceptable, and unsurprisingly quoting the Bible and saying that Jesus encouraged his followers to welcome the stranger. It's not the first time Justin Welby's wading into the debate. You may remember when Boris Johnson was proposing the Rwanda policy, he called it the opposite of the nature of God. So Justin Welby joining a chorus, it must be said, of peers in the Lords today criticising this bill. In the end, though, I think there is an acceptance, at least amongst most peers, that the Commons have passed this and that they should not scrap the bill in its entirety.
Yeah, we had Liberal Democrat peer Lord Paddock, of course, he was a former senior police officer, trying to introduce this so-called fatal motion to actually stop the bill in its tracks. But clearly he needs the support of Labour peers as well. And the Labour Party is indicating, it wants this process for the bill to actually go through both chambers to be addressed.
Yeah, indeed, and there's two kind of ways to look at this, if you like. First of all, Mark, there is the argument the government would make, which is, i.e., what we heard from Suella Braverman a little bit earlier on today, the Home Secretary, that this is kind of the popular will of the people. Now, she's saying that that's what the British people want to see. They want to see the small boats crisis come to an end. I think there's little doubt about that. Whether they support this bill in its entirety, that's a whole other question. But clearly the Commons is, it may well be the lower chamber, but is the only democratic chamber in this battle, this tug of war, if you like. And so there's an acceptance amongst the upper house, the House of Lords, that they should allow this bill to give passage. And I think the Labour Party are interested in this as well, because there is also a political thought process, if you like, Mark, in all of this, that actually what the government might well like is this to be thwarted in the Lords. And that would then at least give the government, give the government a stick to beat the opposition by saying, well, frankly, you've prevented us from introducing this legislation that they think the public ultimately wants.
Yeah, the victimisation, as it were, the Trump approach, as some have called it. But anyway, that debate continuing. We'll see what emerges by the end of the day. Darren, thank you for updating us there at Westminster. But let's stay with the politics, because Andrew Bridgen, MP for North West Leicestershire, has joined the Reclaim Party to become the party's first MP. Of course, he was permanently expelled from the Tory party last month after comparing the government's COVID vaccine rollout to the Holocaust. Well, he confirmed his decision at this news conference earlier with Reclaim's leader, Lawrence Fox. But let's speak now to our political correspondent, Olivia Utley, who can join us outside Reclaim's HQ. I hope you can hear us, Olivia. Clearly, you've got a few problems there. I mean, some people might be actually quite surprised to learn they've even got an HQ.
Yes, the Reclaim Party is the smaller of the two challenger right-wings party. There is Reform and Reclaim. And Reform is polling around 4 or 5%. That has Richard Tyson, Nigel Farage among its ranks. The Reclaim Party, it's actually very difficult to tell what it's polling because most polls don't even include them. That is how small the party is. Martin Daubney stood in a by-election under the Reclaim banner in 2021 and received just 345 votes. And of course, Lawrence Fox, the head of the Reclaim Party, ran as London Mayor and actually lost his £10,000 deposit because the number of votes he got was so low. So for such a small party, it is a really big coup to have a sitting MP in Parliament. The question is, will he retain his seat? Now, Andrew Bridgen has already said that he won't fight a by-election. He says that there is going to be a general election in the next year anyway, so he doesn't want to put his constituents through the process of voting twice. And he thinks that he has a good chance of retaining his seat. He's got 64% of the vote in his constituency, and his share of the vote has been going up every election that he's been in power. That said, MPs as a whole tend to overestimate the amount of personal support that they have in their own constituencies. By most estimates, most MPs might have 4,000 or 5,000 personal votes, but the vast majority of the votes that they are receiving are votes for the party, so in Bridgen's case, for the Conservative Party. So it does seem pretty unlikely that he will be able to hold on to this seat for Reclaim when the general election comes.
Yes, he said that news conference he was joining a new tribe. Of course, the problem is it's just a tribe of one at the moment. And he described the Conservatives as misguided and out of touch. True change can only be achieved from outside the party. But do we know what change, what policy Reclaim would actually put forward at a general election?
Well, in terms of actual specific policies, Reclaim is pretty light, but what their sort of main principle, what they stand for is for free speech. And all over their website, they talk about how there is no free speech in the United Kingdom anymore. And of course, Andrew Bridgen got kicked out of the Conservative Party because of the comments he made comparing the vaccine to the Holocaust. And so in a way, he's sort of the perfect representative for a party which claims to stand for free speech. It also has waded in on all of the other sort of culture war issues, if you like. So on the trans issue, for example, the Reclaim Party is very active. But yeah, in terms of precise policies, Reclaim hasn't quite got its ducks in a row, as it were. But in terms of what it stands for, what its objectives are, it is actually pretty clear. It's free speech.
Thank you very much for bringing us that update at the HQ of Reclaim, and apologies, of course, for the various sound issues as well. You may have heard an interjection there from a member of the public. Now, Donald Trump's presidential ambitions, have they died in New York? We'll be assessing the impact of that civil case over those sexual assault allegations. What does it mean for his race for the White House? That coming up in a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends were like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, Donald Trump ordered to pay a magazine columnist nearly £4 million in damages after a jury in the US found that he'd sexually abused her in the 1990s. Those jurors in New York also finding the former US president had defamed E. Jean Carroll by branding her as a liar and saying that her claims were a hoax. Well, Trump had repeatedly denied allegations of sexual misconduct, calling the verdict now a disgrace. This is what he had to say earlier.
I have absolutely no idea who this woman is. The verdict is a disgrace, a continuation of the greatest witch hunt of all time.
Let's get now the views of US political journalist and commentator Laurie Laird, who can join us. Laurie, you may describe it as a disgrace, but of course the decision sticks, and until the appeal goes through, he could be facing quite a big bill.
Yeah,
Absolutely, he could be facing quite a big bill, and there have always been questions over Donald Trump's wealth, whether he can afford to pay this. But again, he said late last night that he does intend to file an appeal. We'll see how that works its way through the system. But I can say that a jury in New York, and I'm not saying that the jury was in any way rigged, but a jury in New York is probably not going to let Donald Trump off. It's not particularly popular in New York. That is not a criticism of the jury, but it is to say that I think any appeal, whenever it is launched, probably will not yield a different decision.
Yeah, unless, of course, he can get the appeal heard elsewhere. But, of course, the other aspect, then, is the political fallout. And certainly, I think there was assertion that he could have shot someone on Fifth Avenue and still get returned in terms of his core support. But it's interesting that one senator, at least John Cornyn from Texas, say you can't win a general election with just your base. You might get the Republican ticket, but actually winning a race for the White House, that's a completely different matter.
And hearing that from somebody like John Cornyn, who is well to the right of the Republican Party, is fairly significant. And there are a couple of voices that have put their heads above the parapet. Kevin Kramer in North Dakota has said, you know what, enough is enough. We really need to look at our candidate here. But it is noteworthy that some of the big names in the Republican Party are keeping quiet. Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, has quite characteristically dodged comment. Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, also a very powerful Republican in the Senate, did say that the jury is messed up, that Donald Trump could never get a fair trial in New York. So John Cornyn saying that we need to rethink things is very significant. He is a big name in the Republican Party, but the other big names are not coming out. They are not criticizing Trump in any way. Cornyn has a point. If you just have your base, it is difficult to win a general election. In fact, we saw that in 2020. But as for running for the Republican nominee, look, there are two elections coming up. One is to be the Republican candidate. The other is the general election. I don't think these events yesterday affect Donald Trump's chances of winning the Republican nomination should he go forward and run.
Yeah, but you talk about the big names. One of the biggest names, of course, Ron DeSantis, has not actually indicated what his response is. Perhaps he's biding his time. But clearly there will be a battle, if you like, for hearts and minds. And that's important because we gather it's the so-called soccer mums, I think, those suburban housewives, the floating voters, who will decide in terms of the White House election. And clearly this is not going to be helpful for Trump in terms of achieving that vote.
And some of those women, these soccer moms, these university-educated women, did stick with him in 2016, despite that. You remember that Access Hollywood tape that came out where Donald Trump says, I love to grab women by their genitalia. He kind of admitted that this is his modus operandi. Still, college-educated women did stick with him in 2016. They began to desert him in the midterm elections in 2018, deserted him in droves in 2020, and it seems to me questionable that you can get that kind of a vote or those women on board for the next presidential election. But as I say, you got to go through the primary first, and I think Donald Trump at the moment is fairly secure in getting that nominee. Say that vote were held, the primary started to roll tomorrow, I think he would be very safe in getting the nomination. However, he's got a lot of legal troubles ahead of him. I think this case in Georgia will be quite telling.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, obviously, it's the whole aspect about his financial arrangement, but also the fact that more women may now actually be encouraged to come forward, and this could be the start of an ongoing process.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very good point that you've raised. So many women have said, I have been sexual will be encouraged to come forward is a big question. Now, this case in New York is a little bit unique. The New York District Attorney instituted a sort of an amnesty, if you will. Historic cases for a period of a year were allowed to come forward, and this is where E. Jean Carroll's case came through. But some of these historic cases, if they're criminal cases, there doesn't tend to be a statute of limitations, although that varies from state to state. But if it's a civil case, as this one is, there was this amnesty, if you will, this period at which these historic cases could come forward. It may be that some of these cases some of these women who have accused Donald Trump, the statute of limitations may have run out. So difficult to see how that will play out.
Okay, and of course the fact the burden of proof has to be less in a civil case as well. But
Absolutely.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed for updating us with that. And, of course, we'll wait to see what happens in terms of that appeal process that Trump has said he will go through. Plenty more coming up in a moment with all the reaction. But let's get an update on the headlines and we'll be back with you shortly.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. Here's your latest headlines at 2:30. The publisher of The Mirror has unreservedly apologised to the Duke of Sussex for unlawful information gathering. At the start of a trial over alleged phone hacking at the High Court, Mirror Group newspapers admitted that Prince Harry's legal challenge warrants compensation. The tabloid also promised the behaviour would never be repeated. Other high-profile figures involved in the trial include former Girls Aloud singer Cheryl, the estate of George Michael, and footballer Ian Wright. The Archbishop of Canterbury has condemned the government's illegal migration bill in a rare intervention in the House of Lords. The controversial legislation aims to detain and promptly remove people who arrive in the UK in small boats. It also looks to limit the ability of the European Court of Human Rights in preventing the deportation of asylum seekers. Downing Street defended the bill as compassionate and fair. Sir Keir Starmer has criticised Rishi Sunak, saying he no longer has a mandate to run the country in the first Prime Minister's question since the local elections in England. The Conservative Party lost control of 48 councils and more than 1,000 council seats, while the Labour Party gained more than 500. The Prime Minister defended the results, saying a general election holds far more significance, but the Labour leader insisted he's lost the confidence of voters up and down the country. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, tens of thousands of medics could earn while they learn, as they say, in a bid to tackle the workforce shortages within the NHS. Apprenticeship schemes, no less, will be expanded over the coming years to give students the chance to bypass university and earn a wage while they study instead. Well, this scheme could even help to train up to 1 in 10 doctors, we're told, and 1 in 3 nurses. Well, let's get the views now of health writer and commentator and former NHS administrator Roy Lilly joining us once more. Roy, again, thanks for your time here on GB News. I'm seeing that the BMA is saying huge questions about this, whether this model would work at scale, as they've described it.
Well, I think the BMA are going to resist this tooth and nail. They see their whole professional edifice collapsing here. Yeah. Look, Mark, the problem is this. There is a global shortage of healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, allied health professionals. It's a global issue. We've made our situation worse by going through 10 years prior to COVID of flatline funding and not training enough doctors and nurses. And if you look at any international comparisons now, per head of population, we've got fewer doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals than almost anyone in the European Union and most of the OECD. We really are on the back foot. And the problem is it takes so long to train the professionals. I mean, a nurse, it takes 3 years plus a year's preceptorship. And then a doctor, well, it's, you sort of start from 10 years and go from there. So it's a real problem, and we have huge shortages, and that's the difficulty. So what do we do? All we can do is to try and speed up the training process and get more people on the wards during their training process, and that points us in the direction of an apprenticeship scheme. Now, there is an apprenticeship scheme for nurses now. It was resisted by the Royal College of Nursing and nurse professionals when it first came out. It's a 5-year course, whereas a nurse's normal course is 3 years, but this is 5 years working as an apprentice on the ward. It ends up with a degree. It's the same qualification, but it takes longer, and it's called earn to learn. So they earn while they're learning. I absolutely get why the professionals will be against this, but I don't see really there's much alternative but to have this kind of approach.
But I'm just wondering, in terms of the logistics, how on earth it's going to be approached, whereas we're told doctors properly, for instance.
Yes, absolutely, Mark. And it's what's called the rookie problem.
Yeah.
What do you do with a rookie on a ward? If nurses are rushed off their feet, if you've got one nurse to, 10, 12 people on a ward, perhaps even more, and you've got a rookie saying, well, what shall I do now? It's a damn nuisance. And of course, that puts people off. It makes training unpleasant, and the whole thing doesn't work very well. Listen, this is beset with problems. There is no question about it. And it's not going to happen tomorrow. And it is part of the workforce plan, which has been in gestation for goodness knows how long now. I mean, it's been held up by the Treasury because of the costs of training, and we don't know when the workforce plan is actually going to be published. So, given that it will be published sometime this year, then there'll have to be a consultation. There'll be a punch up over this. This is probably 2 or 3 years before we see any real substantial changes. But there's no question about it. We do have to change the direction of how we train professionals, and we do have to train to change how we do it. And the other issue is, of course, that the government this year have put a cap on the number of doctors they're prepared to train at 7,500. They say it costs $250,000 a year to train a doctor, and they haven't got the money to train any more. We desperately need doctors. There's a queue of young people with eminent qualifications who want to come into the professions, but the Treasury won't stump up the cash. So, we have somehow or other to break this logjam.
Yeah, and of course we've got the government admitting again that it's missed its targets in terms of the waiting lists and so on. We've had the initiative, as they describe it, of pharmacists being put into the front line. I mean, does this all sort of smack of panic a little bit, do you think?
Yes, I mean, I think it does. I mean, you know, I think the election of their local elections was a bit of a wake-up call for the government. Time and time again on the doorsteps, I'm hearing people were saying, you know, what's your big problem? Well, I can't get to see a doctor, and my granny's been on a waiting list for years. They have to do something about waiting, and of course, it's been made worse by the fact we've had 2 recent very big strikes, which has increased the waiting list by about 500,000 people. Now the nurses look like they're going to kick off again in the summer, and the junior doctors are very quiet. Who knows what they're going to happen next? But so the NHS just hasn't had a period of calm to roll up its sleeves and get on with things. You know, we've had COVID, very bad flu season, and now the strikes. So
one thing after another.
Rishi Sunak, of course, has promised the end of waiting lists by what is it? Probably 18 months now. There's no way in the world he's going to do that. And that's going to be a huge embarrassment for them come the election. So they've got to look busy. And I think this is just part of looking busy.
Roy, as ever, thank you very much indeed. I suspect we'll be speaking to you again fairly soon on all these issues, but thanks for your time. Much appreciated. Roy Lilly, they're updating us. Now, Northern Ireland's largest agricultural food event, the Balmoral Show, starting today. Now, a 4-day event to showcase some of the finest produce that the province has to offer. But this year's event, too, coming at a difficult time for farmers. High interest rates having a huge impact on the sector, and the strength of the pound, of course, which has strengthened these past few days, making it hard to export their produce. Well, let's get more now with Doogie Beattie, who joins us live at the show for the very latest. And Doogie, just on that point, of course, I guess a lot of those farmers tomorrow will be looking at what the interest rate decision is by the Bank of England, which affects their exports there from Northern Ireland.
Well, they are indeed, Mark. Yes, it is actually the main talk here at the show is the rising costs, and amongst those are those interest rates that intend to go up. Don't forget, farms are a business, and they're a very, very heavily invested business. Many of these farms would be running overdrafts or loans of over £1 million. When you take the price of crops, of animals, of tractors, it wouldn't be hard to run that up. And of course they have to wait a year until they get that money back, because it takes that long. Actually, in the dairy sector, it takes about £2,000 and about 2 years to bring a calf from birth into the dairy herd. So you can imagine how long it's going to take them getting that back. Also, the chatter here about the price of milk, how it's come down and come down again. And of course, that's going to affect how much haylage and silage will be manufactured this year to feed those herds. Other things on their mind is the methane legislation that Europe brought in. You remember we covered that in Holland, and of course that's now being brought into Ireland. Some farms here being asked to lose up to a third of their cattle. So frightening enough times for the farmers, very worrying of course for the price of food, and food security more important than anything on anybody's minds at this moment.
Yeah, as you've been indicating, of course, they were hit with all the things such as the fertiliser costs going up and all the knock-ons from the situation in Ukraine. But, I mean, what you've been gleaning, I guess, from people there is that this could result in our shopping baskets being yet more expensive next year when these additional problems feed through.
Well, that's exactly it. Anything from last year, we will only be feeling it in our shopping baskets next year, in this year through, and any costs that are coming down now, of course, will be in 24 months' time. I had mentioned before, combine harvesters 3 years ago, £600 a day to run. Last year were £1,300 a day to run, and the farmers were still only getting £265 a tonne for cracked barley. And of course, cracked barley is the food of our food. It's our cows and cattle's food. It what goes into their feed. So those farmers will still need to get that back, and that produce will still come back in, and the high cost of it come back into our shopping basket.
Yeah. Liam coming up to explain the situation on the interest rates, but of course, Doogie, as you say, all eyes there on what the Bank of England will be doing tomorrow, because it affects the pound as well, of course. Well, the Bank of England and the Monetary Policy Committee meeting tomorrow. Just to remind you, the base rate currently 4.25%. It could go up yet again, bringing the base rate perhaps up to 4.5%. Let's get the latest view on what could be the highest level since the financial crash, because Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor, joins us now with On the Money. We got there because obviously Doogie was explaining why it's so important for all those farmers there, not just in terms of the cost of their raw materials feeding through the system, but they then have to sell on and export. At the moment, the pound going ever higher because of what they think might be the interest rate policy.
I think Doogie does a great job actually reporting from Northern Ireland, particularly on the farming sector. He's very close to the farming sector, key part of the economy over there in Northern Ireland.
Industry, a big industry, isn't it?
And indeed, what's been happening on food prices, which those farmers know all about, has really fed into this bigger macroeconomic picture. As you say, we do have an interest rate decision coming tomorrow. I'll be reporting from the Bank of England all day. Let's look at what's happened to interest rates since late 2021 when they started being raised. You see, back in 2017, they were very, very low through 2018-19. Then COVID lockdown, they went even lower. They went to 0.1% from mid-2020, and then from late 2021, we've had 11 successive interest rate rises to tackle inflation mark.
A stairway to the sky.
Up to 4.25% now. The consensual opinion, I'd say, the consensus view is that tomorrow the Bank of England will raise interest rates again to 4.5%. That wasn't expected to happen until we had that March inflation number, of course. It stayed in double digits, 10.1% on the Consumer Price Index. I actually think the next inflation number for April, when it comes out next week, will start with a 9 or possibly even an 8, as I said to you a couple of weeks ago. But despite that, I do think the Bank of England is going to raise interest rates.
And even if it's 8 or 9%, still way above their 2% target.
2%.
But just to explain to people, when the Bank of England says that we don't want inflation to become embedded, how do they see that happening? How do they think monetary policy or higher interest rates prevents that happening?
Well, the main transmission mechanism, if you like, is if you raise interest rates, it makes it harder to borrow. It makes it harder for households to borrow, particularly if they're on a variable rate mortgage, home loan. It makes it harder for businesses to borrow. So that slows down demand in the economy, which is meant to slow down the rate of increase of price rises. I would contest that, which is why I've actually been writing columns in the last couple of weeks saying I think the Bank of England should hold interest rates. Because I don't really think now that it's interest rates and demand that have been pushing up inflation. I think inflation is going to start to come down quite quickly. And the inflation that we do have is because of energy prices and ongoing supply chain issues, which has got very little to do with demand.
And particularly in the grocery sector, of course, the food basket, that's remaining stubbornly high because of those particular problems, of course, in the supply chain.
And also because I believe, again, the big supermarkets will contest it, but we've talked about this a lot, Mark, haven't we, for many weeks? And now mainstream...
refilling their coffers
mainstream
a bit,
politicians like Ed Davey are starting to wake up to this issue. I think there is a lack of competition in some of our key sectors, energy, food retailing, and so on, which are causing prices to stay too high for too long.
Now, we were talking to Doogie about the issue of the higher pound, which makes exporting more difficult. But the interesting thing is, it is a vote of confidence, if you like, in the state of the economy. If the currency goes higher, people have got more confidence in that economy. And this has taken people by surprise a little bit.
It has. I mean, again, a lot of economists, not least at the Bank of England, the Office of Budget Responsibility, have been saying, the UK is going to go into recession. Of course it is. Some of us said that it wouldn't, and it hasn't so far. But again, Doogie's put his finger on something there, because a higher pound is a double-edged sword. A higher pound does make your exports less competitive, as those farmers are discovering, but it also makes your imports cheaper. So a higher pound helps keep inflation lower than it otherwise would be. And that's the main argument for the Bank of England, I think, to raise interest rates. If they didn't raise interest rates, the pound would fall because investors would get lower returns from overseas on their pounds.
So all that stuff coming in
and then that would mean you'd be importing more inflation via more expensive imports. So it is a difficult decision. On balance, I would say that the Bank of England should hold now. We've had 11 successive rate rises. They take time to come through the economy, but I don't expect them to do that.
And you're with us 12 noon at the Old Lady Threadneedle Street.
From 10 o'clock, I'll be outside the Bank of England doing live reports on what is a really important decision for both borrowers and indeed savers.
Lots of knock-on effects, indeed. Liam, thank you for that, and we'll have all the latest for you tomorrow, of course, here on GB News. Now, let's talk about Hugo Bernan, because he is the only portrait photographer with a royal warrant given by the King when he was Prince of Wales. He previously worked for His Majesty, or Her Majesty the Queen, rather, also Bill Clinton, Mikhail Gorbachev, Baroness Thatcher, and Michael Jackson. That's quite a portfolio. Let's actually now, having seen those photos, join Hugo and welcome him after what I guess would have been a stressful few days. Have you had a chance to sort of sit down and take it all in, Hugo?
Honest answer, not yet. It's been a real whirlwind.
Yeah, how was it? I mean, did you have everything, pre-arranged? The lighting was there and where you were going to take the photos, or was it all rather manic?
No, we, the way I like to do it is be incredibly well organised, and we had 3 days setting up all the lights. We had cameras in position on tripods, and then we did dress rehearsals with stand-ins, so we knew roughly how long the shoot would take, and did that fit into the amount of time they'd actually given us. So the bizarre thing is, when you are really well rehearsed, it takes away all the nerves, and you just say, come on, bring it on, let's do it, let's see how this is going to happen. And luckily it went well, which is interesting because the dress rehearsals didn't go as smoothly as we wanted, which is actually a good thing, because then we were ready for practically anything that was thrown at us.
Tell us more. That sounds rather intriguing.
Tell you more about what?
What went wrong at the rehearsals?
Yeah. I mean, you know how it is. If a dress rehearsal is perfect, that doesn't really inform you at all. So you want things to go wrong. And in fact, what we did on one occasion was we pretended a light had stopped working.
Right.
And how we would be able to get a new light in place. Didn't happen in the real during the actual photographic session, but we were ready in case it did.
Yeah,
and I had my camera, I don't know if you can see it, but I had 4 cameras on tripods in position. So if something had gone wrong with the camera, we could just slide another one straight in.
So you had a backup. But is the problem now when you rehearse these things and everyone goes through it, you lose that sort of vitality at the real shot, if you like, and getting that sort of life in it?
That's the key point. If you're so well rehearsed on the lights, the composition, the colours, everything, then what that does is it enables me to communicate with the people or the persons I'm photographing. Because a real portrait, actually, you're looking at the emotion. And if I can't see the emotion, then you won't be able to see the emotion in the photograph. So everything has to be incredibly well organised so that I then, at the time I'm taking the photographs, can literally communicate with the person that I'm photographing.
And what was the emotion? Because they must have been exhausted. And, of course, the crowns, we're told, particularly King Charles, they're weighing 5 pounds. He had neck problems, as we understand from Prince William afterwards, because of trying to hold his head straight all the time.
Well, yes, I mean, if you want to say what were their sort of official duties, there was a procession early in the morning, then there was the whole coronation in the Abbey, then there was the procession coming back. These were all for the public to see and witness. Same again on the balcony, and they were still performing when they came to me to have photographs taken. So, but a good photograph has energy in it, and an energy comes from adrenaline. So part of my job is to summon up some energy, enthusiasm, adrenaline, so that we can get a photograph as quickly as possible. And you can't keep that adrenaline going for very long, so you have to be really quick with the photographs.
And I have to ask you finally, are you happy with them? Because now this is, of course, part of history. This is the official record.
I'm happy with them. I'm very happy with them. As I understand it, other people are as well. Important other people are.
Say no more. And quite an album for them to have as well. And I assume maybe 1 or 2 other shots that we haven't seen publicly, which will be part of the family's occasion, of course. But thank you very much indeed for taking us through there. And glad that you've been able to have a bit of rest after what would have been a stressful time. Hugo, thank you for your time here on GB News.
Thank you.
Great shots as well, and Hugo indicating that, of course, it was still capturing that moment with all the paraphernalia. Well, that's it from us for the moment, but don't forget we've got the debate continuing in the House of Lords with certainly the Archbishop of Canterbury indicating that he and others are not happy with the government's bill. That's still being debated. We'll update you from there. And, of course, the court case with Prince Harry alleging the problems with Mirror Group newspapers, who have accepted certainly that there have been problems and that the Prince may be entitled to compensation, but denying phone hacking itself. All the latest coming up with Paul from the court. Stay with us here on GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us 4, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep